Okay, we are.
Okay.
She's just getting those copies, yeah.
Hello. Welcome to the Sewer Authority Midcoastside special board meeting to discuss on December 1st, 2018. May we have a roll call, please?
Sorry,
Sorry,
I was
sorry.
making copies.
Sorry.
Okay, so Director Blanchard,
Here.
Director Slater-Carter,
Present.
Director Reddick. Here. Director Warren,
Present.
Director Penrose.
Here.
Director Boyd.
Here.
And do we have any, for number 2, do we have any public comment?
Are we ready to go?
No, I
Yeah.
have a public comment
Oh,
in
sure.
case anybody happens to tune in. For Montera, this is the time of year when you are, your water consumption is getting calculated to be used for your sewer bills upcoming. So this would be a good time to test your toilets to make sure they aren't leaking and check other sources, drippy faucets, and fix them. It helps not only keep your sewer bill down, but it keeps your water bill down. Thank you.
Right.
And everybody should turn off their sprinklers.
Oh, that's a good one too. Because hopefully it'll be a heavy enough rain here, you won't need to sprinkle.
All right. Does that get us ready to
Yes,
roll?
you take a turn. I'll turn it over now to you.
Thank you, Jim.
Take a break.
Well, good morning, everybody. I think we were here almost exactly a year ago. I think it happened to be November 11th, so it's 3 weeks or so. So it's been a year. I think it was a rainy day too, so there are some similarities, but hopefully there's some differences too. I passed out an agenda, and I'd ask you not to worry about the agenda too much, as we have in the past, but there it is for you if you're interested in what we're doing. As usual, the very beginning has me talking a fair amount, but then it should be mostly you talking, 98%. We'll have a brief introduction, which will just take a few minutes. I'm gonna ask all of you what your expectations are for today and for this process. I spoke to some of you on the phone, and I asked you that same question, so maybe you've thought about it a bit, but we'll be asking that. I'd like for everybody to hear what everybody else is thinking and what we're hoping to get out of this. I will have a brief report on the interviews. I spoke to a number of board members, and I spoke to Beverly. And I'll summarize what I heard. Then we'll briefly review the strategic plan itself and the progress to date. I'll have a copy for you, and I'll have it on the screen. And it's really just to remind us what's in it, and very briefly, like, was this completed, was this put on hold, is this in progress? Just a very, very brief summary to orient us to the plan itself. Then we're going to have a period of time where I'm gonna ask each of you to think about the entire strategic plan. Hopefully you received a copy in the email earlier in the week or a week or so ago. And we're gonna basically ask, is there anything we wanna add to the plan? Is there anything we want to keep as is or modify? And is there anything we ought to delete or put on hold? And so we are here to update the strategic plan. We'll talk about that. After that, I'd like to talk about something that I think is actually more important than the strategic plan itself and those details we'll have just gone through, which is, what are the few most important changes we need to make to improve this organization, to move it ahead? And I would honestly be pleased, I'll report this a little more about this later, and I spoke to some of you about this, to see a very few commitments to a couple of initiatives or a couple of goals and objectives that we really intend to achieve and that we find a way to get done and get rolling. Having a lot of things that may or may not get done or we may or may not be committed to is just wasted paper, essentially. After we talk about that, we'll develop some consensus on what's left. So we'll have talked in detail about the whole thing. We'll have talked about what's most important. And then we'll ask ourselves again, okay, we've heard everybody. We've heard all this stuff. What is it that we want for our goals and objectives for the coming year? And then we'll have a conversation about how we're going to assure implementation, how we're going to monitor it, how we're going to provide oversight over the plan, and what's next, any further steps we decide to move forward on. It's a full day. There's plenty of work to do. We'll move right along. I'd encourage you not to worry about time. I'll worry about time. If you are worried about time, let me know and I'll respond. I believe we're scheduled from 10 to 3, is that correct?
2.
2, okay, 10 to 2. So we're gonna keep moving along. There will be a lunch break. And the way we'll handle lunch is, as we've done in the past, we'll get our lunch, we'll start eating, and as soon as we've settled down a little, we'll work through lunch, just because our time is so short. So with that, are there any questions or any comments so far? Otherwise, I'll make a brief introduction. We are rolling. Okay, good. I want to ask you first, before my introduction actually, what your expectations are for the day. And I'd like each of you to think for a minute. You all have a little pad of paper, and I'd remind you, as we've done in the past, when I ask a question, I'd ask you, please, if you would take a note for yourself, not just think in your mind. Have the little bit of discipline to take a note. I'm not going to collect them. No one's going to read them. It just helps us think, I think. So I'm going to ask you to think, what are your expectations for this process and for this day? And you can be thinking about that while I just bring up one other topic, which is just some thoughts about our interactions today. And these are the exact same things I brought up last time. I think one important thing for this particular group is to be real clear when we're talking about when we really agree to something and we really believe in it and we can support it and back it, when we can't do that, or when we're not sure whether it's a maybe or it's transitional. And I'd really like to leave the day with all of us knowing where we stand. Do we really agree with something? Can we follow through with it into the future? Is it conditional? If so, what's it conditional upon? Or is it, this is really tough for me, I'm not going to find a way to go along with this. We want to hear that. We don't want to just complete a conversation and not having heard what you really think and believe. When we talk about things that we're having trouble with, that's perfectly fine. In fact, I encourage you to talk about the things that we're not happy about, things that aren't working, things you don't like. But I'd like you to also think about how you would like it to be. So just to pick a random example, if we're unhappy with anything, the budget, the CIP, some report, some activity, that's fine. Let's hear what you're unhappy about. But it'd be helpful if you have some constructive thoughts about what you do want. How would you like to see those things? What could be different instead of just what we don't like? Listen well and carefully. It's a rare chance to have all of us in this room together at this time. There's some extra people here. We're going to have at least one manager in the room later today, I believe. Let's take a chance to listen to each other and hear what each other are saying. Let's understand their point of view and try to save our speaking before we've tried to really understand what their perspective is. And try to account for that when we speak up. You know, what can we say that might move this along, that might accommodate or at least recognize what they said, even if we disagree with it, and find some way to move forward. Finally, of course, common courtesy always helps. I've always been a fan. This is a casual town, and that's wonderful. I like that. And there's casual practices. A little bit of formality in terms of courtesy and manner of interacting with each other is a very helpful thing in a setting like this. So I'd encourage you to think about that while you're talking. And last thing before I ask you to talk about your expectations, this little sign is, I'll say at different times I'm seeking consensus. My definition of consensus for today, we're going to have opportunities to come back when you vote, right? We're not voting today. Nothing will get approved, nothing will turn real in the world. But we're going to presume that if the majority of the board agrees with something, then we're probably going to hopefully have a majority vote sometime in the future. And I'd like us to remember as we think and talk about things that hopefully this discussion today and your discussions in the future are explicit, rational, and fair. In other words, we understand how the conversation is moving. We understand where the information came from. We got a chance to hear what other people are saying fairly. Each of you should be treated well, and every one of you should have your inputs heard. We're going to definitely do that. And we want to ask ourselves at the end of every conversation, whether I like it or not, whether I agree with it or not, can I live with this and commit to the outcome in the end? And I wouldn't be surprised, it would be possible that nobody would like completely any single thing we talk about today. We have a lot of differences, a lot of different interests. We also have a lot of commonalities. And the idea is to find, what can we live with together? What can we agree to and commit to after we leave this room so that we can get things done. So with that, I'd like you to take a moment. I kind of hogged up some of your mental space after I asked the question. What is it that you expect to achieve today and then in this process, after today? What is it that you'd like to leave this room and this process having achieved? And it could be a couple of things. Hopefully it's not 20 things. But take a moment to think. When I see pencils or pins drop, then that's my signal that you've thought it through. I know some of you may type it. If so, then when your fingers stop typing, then I'll collect. We'll hear what you have to say. Before we get started, a couple of thoughts. One, we have a couple of staff members here. I think it would be helpful to hear from them, just like we hear from the board. You all know who's staff and who's a board member, but they know things that none of us know, and I think it would be very helpful to hear what they have to say. So I'm gonna call on them like everyone else. We also have a couple extra people we have a person in transition from, 2 people in transition from Granada and a visiting new board member. I'm gonna just include them if that's okay. We all know who everybody is. We're not voting, so we'll just hear their voices. It will be helpful, I think, to hear what people think. So I'm gonna ask everyone to respond to every major question. So don't worry if you're new to this process. We are gonna hear from everyone. And I wonder if we could start with you, Jim. We'll just randomly go around the room.
Okay. So I think one part is going back even to what we had in the plan from before, is identifying and clarifying the roles of the manager with the member agency manager.
Right. Okay. Okay, good. Is there anything else that you have on your list?
I'd like to resurrect recycled water or not.
You'd like to resurrect recycled water?
Anyway, we have not talked about that for you.
All right,
That's fine.
that covers it. Let's just come around this way. Catherine?
Okay, I echo Jim on the roles of the managers. And I believe in reviewing the strategic plan as it is, I'm really impressed with the document. I think it's a really good document. But we need to figure out how to implement these nice goals. So one is having gone through the process last year, and now we're here, things that I think we need to figure out as an organization is in relation to what Jim said, and that we need to be able to get a better structure for communication and timeliness of communications, in particular for budgets and projects And we need, communication protocols, that, so that we can make sure, and transparency of communications. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in the background, and, I think we need to be able, as board members, need to know, be able to find out if we care to, rather than being informed all the time, but have a way to find out, to follow up on what these things are. What's being said, what's being arranged.
Okay? Is that completed?
That's it.
Okay, great.
So I would say, complete a successful resolution of the Halfland Bay lawsuit,
Okay.
one.
Can I ask you, can this process have anything to do with that?
Well, I think this process today can, hopefully set a positive tone going forward,
Okay,
so that
good.
we can,
Right.
talk to each other respectfully about it, and,
Okay, good. Absolutely.
and then, complete our internal controls review, consider those recommendations and adopt practices.
Okay.
And then resolve conflicting ideas about how we should approach the budget, structure of the budget.
The structure or the structure and the process?
Well, structure and process. So I agree with Catherine that there are communications issues that need to be resolved. But there's also been, some conflict over the structure of the budget itself. Like, Halfland Bay has been, promoting the idea that we should have a separate capital budget as opposed to calling it operations and maintenance. So resolving those sorts of issues.
Okay, good. Does that complete your
Yes.
main concerns?
And I
Okay.
just wanna say too, I do support, Jim's idea about, having a better understanding of what the roles of the leagues should be is gonna be really important.
Okay, so you, the little check marks just mean
Yeah.
second or third
So,
person.
support Kevin's idea of communications, Jim's idea about, roles of management.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'll second everything that's been said already. I think those are all good starting points. I kind of break it down into, I see all four agencies, the way they communicate and operate is incredibly fragmented. I think there's communications and everything else, it reaches a certain point and it stops. I think there needs to be a better process flow. I think that starts with, people in the field. I think you talk to them and ideas of improving the effluent that's going out and all these other things that I think, are amazing ideas that we should be discussing as boards, but because of the fragmented structure of these four agencies, those things don't flow all the way up to the board level to where there's decisions on those. So I think that, just working together better and, treating it like the way that it is, like all of us managing one coastside sewer system, anything towards that would be tremendous.
Okay. Does that cover what you're thinking?
Yeah, especially seconding everything else that's been said that I agree with.
Okay, good, thank you. We got you.
Come to me last and then I wouldn't have to say anything. Well, I certainly agree with, the first two items there, for sure. I think those are really obvious ones. Not sure really how to state what I'm thinking of on the communication. Communications, it seems to me that there's a whole bunch of different angles to the issues here, and maybe the only thing that I'll say that nobody else is gonna be willing to say is that SAM staff and member agency staff have to work past their personality conflicts and be professional about passing information back and forth.
Okay. Does that cover your thoughts?
Uh, Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Barbara?
Hi, I didn't get introduced, I'm Barbara Dye, I'm
Oh,
gonna
I'm sorry.
come in as the SAM rep at the next meeting, filling very big shoes from Leonard Warren. So my goal mostly today is to, learn more and understand more. Having said that, since I have been an appointed member of the board for a year and a half, I understand a lot of these issues. I agree with number one, the role of the member managers and the SAM manager. I'm interested in the recycled waters, but it's been off the table since I've been around, so I don't know much about that project at all. I need to get up to speed. I know I've been very frustrated by the way the budget comes to our agency, that it comes and our staff has concerns, but we can't do anything about it. We're given this, well, we're not happy with this budget, but you have to vote for it anyway. That seems like the wrong way to run an agency. And I look forward to learning about, discussing all these issues, so there's a lot there.
Good, thank you, Barbara. Okay.
Yeah, I agree with just about everything there. My first expectation is more of a hope,
Okay,
and that is to have a clear organizational outline for our member agency managers and our general manager and board members.
does that relate to this? but
It
taking
relates
a
very
little
much
farther?
to that. Identify and clarify.
And include the board.
Yep.
Yes, the board needs to be part of that
Okay.
clarification.
And what was the term you used? I'm sorry. Just organizational.
Organizational outline,
What do you mean?
What I mean by that is when do the member agency managers speak? Who do they speak to? How is the board involved? Is everybody talking at once? Is there an outline for it? Is there a
Okay.
step-by-step process
Right.
for things?
You're
And
looking
that's
for an org chart?
organizational outline,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
I don't know what else to call it.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah. My second is to add a board member to allow for breaking a tie vote. And that's, I know, very controversial, but I see us as doing an awful lot of talking about getting places, and I look at our strategic plan from last year, and I think it's a lovely document, and we've accomplished just about nothing on it. So I'm hoping today is not a waste of time. I agree with Debbie on the need for internal controls, procedure manuals, ways for information from the board to get to the field, get from the field to the board, so that everybody knows exactly what's going on with the rusted out pump station. And everybody has clear understanding of how to prioritize things. So I look at our capital improvement budget and I see 50,000 things on it, and they've been prioritized. I don't know why they're prioritized the way they are, and I need to understand that before I can vote for it. I also agree that we need one coastside sewer system. And, whether we do that, keeping the JPA and adding a tiebreaker would be one way to accomplish that. Another way to accomplish that would be to go to a special district. There are probably additional ways to accomplish it that I'm not aware of.
Can I summarize what you're saying? Achieve one functional organization, and you gave these two ideas, add a director, go to a special district.
Right. Right.
Okay, that was implied, right?
Yeah.
Anything
Wait.
else?
No, that's all.
Okay, great. Did someone have a question?
I'm confused by the difference between one functional sewer district and a new special district.
I'm not sure what you mean by confused. I'm saying that our sewer system does not function well. We're constantly divided, we're getting 4-4 votes. I don't think that's a workable system, I don't wanna see it go on in the future, and I wanna see some way to correct that. And I have one suggestion would be for the board members to elect someone from the outside that everybody can agree on to come in and be a board member and act as a tiebreaker. Not that that person would be told to break the tie, but at least we'd have 5 votes or 9 votes, however many that is, however it adds up. The other way to do it would be just dissolve the JPA and create a special district through LAFCO.
Okay. Scott?
I'd endorse the very first one like everybody else has. We've gotta endorse recycled water. The other stuff, yes. I would add, and I think it kind of amplifies maybe a little bit on some of the points of, like to have a calendar that we all see things coming, and we agree that the right preparatory steps are on that. That would fit both with the budget process, for example, but also, you know, we know what's going to be coming on the agendas, so we have some idea before it gets there. We have the opportunity to say, hey, we'd like this, like you said, you'd like information about how the prioritization happened. Well, if we know we're going to have the prioritized items put in front of us, it gives us an opportunity to say, could you bring us some information maybe ahead of time to help us understand how that list was created, or at least make sure that's part of it. So that kind of predictability, the forecasting, so we see it coming, and we all have that idea of what's coming down the road. And I'd like to see that. It probably gets a little fuzzy after like 6 to 9 months, but I'd like to try to keep it out there for a year, so you know we would know that a year from now there's another strategic planning workshop, and the budget process starts. And if we have that kind of skeleton, then we can start hanging on it. You know, we'd really like to have our managers weigh in on this issue, so maybe we could put some meetings on the calendar and just use it as a kind of a planning graph that it lets us think concretely about, you know, right here would be a good point for gathering that information, pulling in those pieces of feedback. And if we all have and we don't even have to agree at all about what outcomes are, but we can agree on the process of how we get there, so that when we land on the day of the vote, we feel like, you know, this has gone through a process that we like, and we've had our shot at trying to shape it, or we have our shot at trying to get what we need. This is, we've tried on and off. I'd like to try that again, because where we've done well forecasting, there's been a lot fewer surprises, and nobody likes surprises.
Okay.
Maybe that's useful.
Does that cover it, Scott? Or?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Beverly? Oh, and I'm sorry, I don't know.
Rick.
Rick.
He's newly elected to Montero.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And he was at the strategic plan workshop
You're
as a board member of GCSD before.
getting
Right.
aging mind here.
And this feels really strange being here.
It feels really good to me.
So, Rick,
That long
welcome,
driveway.
yeah.
and-
I asked everyone if they would comment on their expectations for this day and this process. And we may want to give you a minute, continue around if you want to comment. Or maybe you know right off the bat what you think.
Just say you agree with Catherine and you're done.
I agree with
And
Catherine.
Scott.
The first two are my biggies.
Okay.
Figuring out what we're really gonna do here and then get recycled water going again. It was pushing that hard and then it died again, so I'd like to get that launched. It's
Okay, good.
important.
Good. All right. Back to you, Beverly.
I don't have
You
anything.
want to pass?
Me? Why me?
Feel free to comment. I would encourage staff to if they would like.
Oh, obviously the first two are important. Obviously I've been around more than anyone else. Just seeing things evolve through the years, over the years. I was here when the first manager was here. I don't know if everyone knew that, but that's how long I've been here.
You're 100 years old.
Pretty much. Yeah, I was conceived here. No, I'm kidding. The,
I suppose they named his tank.
that's not awkward. I would just like to see a collaborative, approach to everything moving forward. I've heard it, multiple times from different people in the room right now that things are fragmented, and it seems like we need to find a way to get everyone on the same page, everyone in the same direction, get this ship going, north or south or wherever the hell we're gonna go, and, put Sam first, and make sure that that is the main focus of this board, is that Sam needs the resources and everything to function properly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, definitely support resurrecting the recycled water. That will be our topmost priority. And I was also expecting that we might possibly revisit our mission and vision statement, what we drafted last year, and see how we are complying with those statements, whether we need to make any changes, and whether we can make any metrics or measurables for those statements. And lastly, I fully support Mayor Penrose's statement about the tiebreaker. That is really required. We've come across several occasions, so either add another member or maybe change the voting rights to 1.5 to Half Moon Bay so that it finally becomes an option. Whatever, just a suggestion.
Okay, good. All right, that gets us around, after having heard all that, does anyone have any other comments on that topic? I think it was fairly clear. I'm
On which topic?
just this overall topic of expectation.
I don't know if this fits in here or somewhere else, so feel free to say somewhere else.
Okay.
But since this is the last time I'll be sitting here as a board member, I can say this. More staff is not always the solution to everything. The infrastructure here is not properly funded, but I as being fiduciary responsible to my constituents, I just get really tired of no matter what the problem is, we have to add another staff member to fix that. That's
Okay.
not the solution to every problem.
I'm gonna take that as a statement that everyone heard and not as an expectation. It's not
Okay.
really an expectation, so people heard you, and let's move on to the next thing. I do appreciate that it was fairly limited and there was a fair amount of consensus here. We'll leave that there. I do wanna take a few minutes. I'm not gonna give a complete review of the interviews because it's very repetitive. I actually made a note to myself that said, go ahead and repeat what you said last year. I could literally repeat what I said last year. It's exactly the same. We all know the frustrations, we all know the difficulties, we don't need to go into that in great detail. And we spoke about some of the things. I think what stood out to me though is the lack of clear lines of authority. A few of you have brought that up. There's kind of a mush, a little bit of a muddle in terms of when does Beverly really have authority? When do the member managers have authority? When does a board member vote? Sometimes this board has trouble voting and finding consensus and getting a majority vote on a topic. Sometimes there's a vote, and it appears to me, from what I hear from all of you, that there's different opinions after the fact about what we actually voted on. And people come back with different ideas and say, hold on a second, I didn't mean that, and yet you voted, and there it is in the minutes, and there it is, and it's now official. And sometimes there's a vote when people go back home, and whether it's after talking to their member manager, or just local politics, or local pressure from your board or council, you come back now with a different opinion. You agreed at one point, and then maybe now you see things a little differently. And it makes it very difficult to have a rational and decisive progress on anything when it's never clear where the solid ground is, and I think you all know that. Everybody's frustrated, we know that. I would say it's clear to me without knowing any facts about the actual CIP, I read it, I looked at it, but without ever going on a tour, without ever talking to staff, that this system is probably malnourished for funding. That a lot of people talk about, how do we choose what we put in to make it affordable to the member agencies, because it's something that somehow the board could agree upon, because the member managers pushed for it, because it's in the plan and it actually got done. It doesn't always seem clear. Another kind of example of this lack of sort of clarity about how things work, and I hear these kind of comments from almost everybody. Communication, I heard a ton about again. There does need to be some way, and I think even if it's not an ideal way from normal best practices, to find a way to make sure that the board, the member managers, and the local staff, there's some kind of clear circle of communication. We talked about that, and people understand where information came from, and at some point the board has to find a way to be a referee over all of that. In the end, it's the board's responsibility to control that. Beverly can't do that, the member managers can't do that, the home boards can't do that. The only people who can really referee this are the actual board members who vote here. So it really does land back here. I know it's a very intractable and difficult problem. I'm not saying it's your fault or something, but the solution has to come from the board. Beverly can't fix it, no one else can. She can have a role, the member managers can have a role, everybody can have a role, but this board has to find a way to find consensus and approve things and follow through on them. This is just a detail, but there has not been a general manager performance evaluation. That was brought up by a few people. We need to complete that, I think. Some people suggested things like holding training on emotional intelligence and other ways of interacting and communicating. I'm sharing what people have suggested. People talked about a new governance process. I think this kind of stuff about budget and internal controls and calendar, I heard a lot about stuff like that. A number of you suggested, let's be real simple about this. Let's get down to brass tacks. And I think it was you, Deborah, who said, it's a lovely document, but we couldn't get it done. It was beyond the means of this organization as it stands. Some people suggested, and I think there's some merit in it, let's find a few things that we can agree upon and do them well. Let's come up with a budget process and a budget format that works. Let's identify it, maybe even work on that today. That's not a normal strategic activity. That's very just operational, administrative activity. But maybe we need to do that. Maybe I would suggest, very few people suggested it, but I would suggest we add the CIP to that. What is it that we fix? How do we there is a CIP, you approved it, but somehow we're not able to follow it. So through the budget process, maybe we develop some clear ways of how we're gonna develop the budget, what it's gonna look like, what are the priorities to fix things. And a few people suggested if that's all we accomplish through this process, it would not be strategic in any way, but it would certainly be beneficial. So maybe we have to lower our sights and all the other good things, or some of the other good things have to go on a back burner of some sort. But we should think about that. What do we have to do if we want to get this working again? We've just let a whole year go by, kind of the same. I think that's really it. There was a few people brought up succession planning. I don't really know the status of different staff and things, but it may be a little stretched thin, and it is super tough to get operators and skilled and certified folks. That may be an issue, and that would be a strategic issue in this case, because I know plenty of small agencies who cannot hire operators for their life, and you all know that probably. In a town like this, it's hard. So, are there any questions about that? I just offer it for context. I don't think any of that's news to you, but I wanted to just share that's what I heard from folks. Yeah.
I just wanted to throw out there one question that I have that maybe is something that would be good at some point to stop and think about, which is how do you make the movement from representing the people in your district as a board member there to serving on the SAM board, and what are the conflicting or I haven't seen anything that sort of gives any guidance to me as someone who's just starting to do that, and it seems like that's a key factor for everybody now, is how do you balance the two?
Mm-hmm.
Can I sort of summarize that? So how do we deal with conflicting loyalties?
Yeah.
Is that one way to describe that?
Yeah.
Good question. I applaud your question because it really gets to the heart of what the challenge is here. And it's a natural human situation. Let me just give a couple of thoughts of my own, and they're not a solution. There is no answer, quote, to this problem. I do happen to have, I think either fortunately or unfortunately, a minor expertise in dealing with troubled JPAs. I deal with a lot of them.
They're all
And
troubled, it seems like.
they're all, they are all troubled in a way because it's built in to your
redundant.
question, right? You have multiple members, each with their parochial loyalties and interests, having to come together and do something together. But here's a couple of thoughts that I believe super firmly. The thing I believe most firmly is member managers cannot lead in this. The job of an excellent member manager is to take care of his local agency. They are by definition parochial. It's a parochial job. And I don't blame any manager who gets in the middle of the JPA because they do it out of self-interest. They should all your good managers should have the energy and the zeal to come deal with any business that affects Half Moon Bay, El Granada, Montara. I would be concerned if your managers didn't want to. On the other hand, the job of the Montara manager is to worry about Montara. The job of the El Granada one is El Granada, Half Moon Bay, Half Moon Bay. They are incapable by their position of showing broad leadership, except in the most extraordinary circumstances, and you wouldn't want them to. So, who can do that? This board of directors. Your job is to worry about how this organization can somehow serve the overall community and your local agencies. There's nobody else, and you are capable of it. I know enough about all of you, even some of you that I've only met briefly, that you're all decent people, you're all smart people, you're all very experienced people. This is a solid, capable board. But you have local politics, you have a lot of bad history, we have a lot of bad feelings, we have a lot of hurt feelings, we have a lot of tangle here. It's like a dysfunctional family, we're gonna deal with the alcoholic parent when we're all 40-year-old children. Well, there's a lot of crap, under the bridge. It's hard to figure out where we start. But I do know that it's this board. And I think it's important not to place blame on folks. Your managers, for every time they poke in here and try to boss around and try to micromanage, they're doing their job, but they have to be reined in forcibly by this board. They have to be controlled by this board. No one else can do it. Beverly is in an impossible position. She's got 5 bosses from 3 different places, and each of those places have their own politics that impose themselves on it with their own managers. She's got enough issues to run an organization like this. It's a very difficult situation. Beverly cannot fix it. She can play a role. You expect your manager to be productive and to be helpful and to do as you ask, but you cannot turn to Beverly, you cannot ask her to fix it. And so, how can you all figure that out? I think the fact that you were sensitive enough to ask the question shows me that you're capable of finding a way to do it. How do you do a difficult thing? You try. We're here together. It's an opportunity to find a way past some of these things, but I absolutely guarantee it. Nobody but the 5 board members who vote in this room can fix it. 6. The 6 board members who vote in this room can fix it. You're just recognizing that there's other board members, and they'll influence you. You'll go home and they'll say things and want things. You have to find a way to defend the turf here in a reasonable way and find a way to compromise. So I don't know if that's very helpful.
That's helpful, yeah.
But
I just wanted to think
yeah.
about that a little bit.
Turning to the managers, I can tell you, I think there may be, because of the lack of trust, we may need to engage the managers more than you would normally want to under best practices. But we have to recognize if we do that that's harmful to the staff here and difficult for the staff. The member managers have to be engaged, they have to have a chance to give their input, they have to give a chance to say what they think and share with you and discuss, but they cannot have operative control over decisions.
The SAM board, I don't remember the last time this was done, probably some number of years ago, maybe Scott remembers, but the SAM board has explicitly said the SAM board manager, the SAM manager does not take direction from anybody except the SAM board. And so, integral to that is the agency managers can make suggestions, but the SAM manager is free to say, thank you for your opinion.
If I could
Yeah,
throw something in, I think that's all well and good, but then to have member agency managers specifically directing SAM board members what to say and how to vote is a good workaround on that. But it accomplishes, member agency managers having, control. And so I think that we're back to Barbara's question about the balancing act and the board members needing to be cognizant of what, we know that perhaps our member agency managers don't know, and we need to act. When I first got here, it was a lot of discussion about making sure that we were acting on behalf of SAM in the SAM community, wearing our SAM hat when we're here as opposed to our member agency hat. And I had suggested, and I actually still have two different hats, and my thought was I was gonna put them on the table so I could put them on and off, so I could make it quite visible who I was speaking for.
yeah. I'm glad you brought up the question.
Yeah, to me, those are lofty sentiments, and I think we need to have lofty sentiments and lofty ideas. But we need a way to structure things
Yeah,
so that we get it, and that's what I'm talking about, an organizational outline. What I'm talking about is, when does a member agency speak? Is it before or after a budget is given to the board? When does the general manager speak with the member agency managers? Is it before or after? Those are the kinds of things I'm talking about.
Yes.
How do we organize it so that these conflicts that we all have are managed?
I was not implying that is the tool, so, but it has to be enforced by the board in the end.
You know,
So we
Yeah.
need a tool.
we have some of that written down in the JPA, but it would be really useful to take that, put it in like human language for board members and everybody else, and then add in the bits that the extra bits about, okay, the board wants to set policy on when member agency managers weigh in on a topic. Like me, I want our managers talking about budget priorities with the general manager here before before the finance committee gets together and starts really chewing on it. Because, they're stakeholders and they're smart and they're in the business and they've got some ideas. I want everything on that table before we start. So I would write that into that process policy
Right.
document you're talking about, and the outline, and say, okay, here are the things that JPA says about, when the agencies vote, when the board votes, how the specifics of how the budget's approved, but then we back that up to the process that gets us there, and then say, get the right people at the table at the right time. Is that what you're getting at?
That is what I'm saying, and I did leave out one very important factor, and that is staff.
Sure, yeah.
Staff needs to be heard by SAM staff has to be heard by member agencies, and that they're obviously being heard by the general manager. But staff has to play a role in this organizational outline as well.
I agree. Oh, sorry.
So one of the basic problems we have, though, is that there is some disagreement about the value of the JPA in resolving a lot of these issues. It's one of the reasons we're involved in legal action currently. So I would not recommend we rely on the JPA as the way out of this. And I noticed that you keep referring to best management practices. So maybe, is there like a document someplace for JPAs, it says best management practices for you know, running a joint powers authority? What are other people doing, you know? Rather than reinventing the wheel or relying on a document that some of us think is faulty, are there industry best practices relating to management by joint powers authorities? Is that something that, a document that we could have and refer to?
Yeah, well, I could definitely come up with examples. I think they're very idiosyncratic because some are large, some are small, some have powerful managers and some have weaker managers, some have very engaged member managers and some don't. Some want committees, some don't. There's a million variations. But I think it's actually plenty enough to go along the lines of what was being discussed here between Scott and Debbie, where we identify, pick something like the budget. Let's start with one concrete thing.
Do a good one.
How do we work our way through the budget? What happens when? Who provides input at one point? How does that input get distributed? What do we do next? And then what do we do next? And how do we work our way to whatever June, whatever you vote for it? And maybe do that with one or two things. My personal suggestion is the CIP and because you have to fix things, the CIP and the budget. Very practical. How do we do this here with these people that we have to work with?
And I think it would be helpful too for us and for the people who come after us, for each of those things where we say, at this point, this thing happens.
Right.
If that's something that the JPA says, then we just cite the JPA. If it's something that the board policy, you know, we as a board say, you know, we think this is a really good idea and this is what we want to see, then we write that down. That way, in the future, we can go, okay, if we want to change that, where do we go to change it? Do we have to go change the JPA? Do we just have a board meeting? Do we need to go talk to the agencies? That kind of thing. So we just, what's the source of authority for this thing that's on this how-to? And that way, anybody new comes in, looks at that diagram. I think it'd be terrific to,
Let's do it.
right? So it lays it all out in detail like you're talking about. And then we use that as a quick start for anybody who joins in, or the community. They can understand how this process works too.
Well, I like what you're saying there. I just wanna make sure we're just not relying on the language. of the
Oh, no, but
JPA.
right now, you know, the formalities of how we approve a budget, that's written in the JPA. So we just write that down.
Catherine, I see you.
And if we
Thank
think
you.
that that process needs fixing, we know where to go fix it because it says, well, you know, this is what the JPA says we have to do in order for that to be a valid action. And if we don't like that, well, it starts here and we go, with our leadership, we say, well, let's go make that better.
And I do agree that the budget is a great place to start, because the only money that this system has is the money provided by the individual agencies. So you can't ignore the agency managers and their own budget.
No, you
issues,
can't,
so,
no.
yeah.
Sand bake sales just
I'll
aren't.
get you, Catherine.
I would
Well
note that, in this whole mediation, I will ask Beverly, has Sam had any role in this mediation?
No.
Okay. I think
Are you
that,
talking about the lawsuit?
I'm talking about the lawsuit.
Thank you.
And I think it would be a waste of time as board members if we don't go back to our agencies and say, what about Sam in this lawsuit? Doesn't it deserve a voice? Because at this point, the attitude has been, and I don't know who's driving it, and I won't make allusions, but, Sam has been totally left out and is just the, handmaid who's supposed to do what is told. The handmaid's tale, so to speak.
I don't understand why you think Sam has a role in it. I don't get that.
I think Sam, as we've just been saying, Sam is an agency that has its own standing, its own voice, and its own interests. And to leave Sam's interests out of this is, in my opinion, a disservice to the entire community, because Sam is aware of things that the attorneys for the member agencies and the managers for the member agencies and the majority of each of the boards for the member agencies are unaware of. And so I believe Sam has, I think we as board members have an obligation to go back to our boards and say Sam should be included.
Before we have I don't wanna have a debate here, because we'll get to that when it's time. The point's been made, the question's been raised. David, do you have a comment?
Yeah, just kind of thinking kind of the bigger picture. I look at it even before the lawsuit. I think the reality is the status of our JPA is bankrupt, and if a company's going through bankruptcy, you can't look at incremental changes and little changes in processes. Those incremental improvements are good, and every organization needs them. But you have to look at game changers in terms of things that are going to actually lead to sustainable actions. And I look at one, and whether it's realistic or not, one thing comes to my mind when people ask me, well, what can you actually do about it? I say the one thing that kind of keeps coming to my mind is we have essentially one full-time employee at our office that's by herself most of the time. If she worked from the SAM building and we didn't change anything else outside of her working from here, I think that would improve 95% of the issues between our agency and SAM in terms of communication, other things that would immediately get resolved instead of lingering out there for months and months on end. I'm not saying that's necessarily the one solution, but I'm saying I think that we need to admit the status of our JPA is bankrupt, and we need to be honest with each other in terms of what types of game changers could we introduce that are gonna condense the time frames and how we go back to a sustainable situation versus the incremental improvements that we always need to be looking at on a regular basis. But we may not have be in a position just to focus on that right now without the game changers.
All right. That was a general point and a specific suggestion. I know some of these things, yes, build up a lot of questions in people's minds, and we will have a debate on what we choose to debate on, but we can't just go off having interesting discussions or we'll get nowhere. So I'm gonna control what we talk about until we're ready to talk. Did someone have a comment?
Director Lohman.
Director Lohman, did you have a comment?
I do.
Earlier.
And I'll come back to you, Scott.
My comment again was philosophical and not, a specific thing. My feelings about being here on the coast for 28 years has been that newcomer. We have 3 very, very proud agencies. Each of the agencies has done huge number of accomplishments, and they're very proud of those accomplishments. Each group has done great work. I have this kind of a feeling, again, when you have all this pride floating around, that there's a lot of, I know this kind of better than you do, and my manager knows this kind of stuff a little better than you. And it's not a step we have to take or anything, but if everybody thinks about the fact that, think about how proud you are, and then think about how proud the other agencies are, there has to be a different approach to making changes. You can't beat them into submission and, just keep saying we're better, and find a better way of just thinking about what you're doing from the other person's view, who's equally proud, of what they've been doing, whether it's rates or water or whatever accomplishments. So.
Good, thoughtful comment. Scott, did you have a comment?
Yeah, Catherine was talking about something that I kind of wanted to distill that thought down to, back to what Barbara was talking about. How do we differentiate the work that we do at this table versus the work that we do at our other table? And a number of people have said things where it's like, we really have to advocate when we're here. We've got to remember to advocate to make sure this agency works. And so we do have to put on some kind of SAM hat while we're here. We don't forget where we come from, and we still have responsibilities there, but while we're here, focus on making this thing work best we can. And what I got out of what Catherine said was, there are times when we as a board are going to have to advocate for, and I'm, without speaking to the specific of what she's talking about, we're going to have to advocate for, to be the advocate for SAM and say, SAM needs to be doing this thing. So maybe we say, SAM needs to be involved in this process, or SAM's a stakeholder in something, we need to make sure that SAM is adequately represented in whatever that thing is. And that's just part of wearing the SAM hat, is remembering it's this group that says Sam is or isn't a stakeholder here, and Sam should or should not participate. It's just, I heard several things, and it all kind of came down to, well, there's only one group that's gonna advocate for Sam to have a voice in any particular thing, and that's gonna be the people at this table. So if it does happen, it's because it happened here, and if it doesn't happen, it's because we chose not to do it here.
Okay.
It was just kind of a distilling, I think.
Leonard, were you wanting to make a comment?
Yeah, philosophically, this isn't any different from, say, state legislature or, you know, at the national level, we can ignore the current political dysfunction, but ultimately, everybody who's elected to go to a state legislature or to go to Congress is there in a dual role. They're representing where they came from, but they're also there to do what's best for the state as a whole, or the country as a whole. The SAM board members have to act the same way. But they have to figure out how to balance doing what's best for SAM with still doing what's best for their member agency. And it's often tough, you know, I'm not gonna say it's easy, but every SAM board member has to all the time think about, well, maybe we need to do what's best for SAM.
Okay, good. I'd like to pause the conversation for a minute. I see people getting up. Lunch is at noon. We started at 10. It's 11:15. Do we want to take a very short break just to give people a moment to get up, get coffee, go to the restroom, whatever they just?
I can listen while I get my coffee.
Or are we good? Do we just trudge through? Is noon roughly lunch, or how is lunch?
Yes.
Okay,
News.
let's keep going. That's what I would do. But go ahead, Barbara.
Well, it seems as if one task that everybody identified already that could be done would be to talk about the budget process.
Yes.
And so my question is that something that we're meant to work on, something like that we're meant to work on today? Or do we set up a process by which we try to resolve that issue?
Let me pause with that question as a transitional question. And let's move on to the next thing. And then Barbara, we'll answer your question after that.
Okay,
Because I think that is the question for the day. Are we gonna derail the strategic plan a little bit and focus on something very specific and narrow? Or are we gonna have a strategic plan on broader things, or a mix of both? What are we gonna do? In the end, I think we'll take care of all of it, one way or the other, here today or some other day. Like, we need to take care of what we have to take care of. But I'd like to change the discussion now and look at the whole strategic plan briefly, because I think we owe it to ourselves to like grapple with that thing. All those words, we don't have to get stuck for hours in it, but we need to look at it and decide what we're gonna do with it. And the only way to do that would be to actually look at it.
Do you have a hard copy?
I do have a hard copy for everybody, sort of a stripped down one. This version has just the mission, vision, and values, and the goals and the objectives without all the extra words to it. And it has a summary of what was accomplished and not accomplished that
Thank you.
Beverly had sent out a memo, I think, where she marked each item as on hold or ongoing. I added a few words myself. They may not be 100% correct, because I decided at the last minute last night to just do it myself, and I didn't have a chance to check with Beverly. But it's probably close enough. And if it can come back, I'll work off my paper version, and then we'll go to the screen in a minute. Their computer fell asleep. Is there a spare one floating around?
There is, yes.
Yeah, did Beverly get one?
Yes, you did.
I want to just quickly go through this so we remember what's there. It sounds like most of you looked at it again at least, but just in case. There's a mission and a vision, and then there's this thing called Sam's approach to fulfilling its mission and vision. And it's a bunch of high-flying statements that are very nice about how we would like to be. And they're great. And I believe you probably all really would like to see the world this way, but we're nowhere near achieving that. We'll talk about what to do with that in a minute. But so there's a mission and a vision. You can look at it, these Sam's approach to fulfilling its mission and vision. Goals and objectives. There's 5 goal areas. They're numbered 1 through 5. You can see the first one is reuse and recycling. There's a little statement about it. And then the numbered 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, those are the objectives. Some of them are actually kind of initiatives. We ignore the fact that they're not all perfect objectives, that's fine. And then there's some notes about each one, giving a little additional board direction. If you look at the end of each section in a colored type, 1.1, encourage steady progress of the current water recycling project with the target of having it operational by the end of 2018. If Beverly works 24 hours a day, she might get that done, right, Ms. Mill? The recycled water program?
Not with a lawsuit, no budget.
I'm joking. So obviously we didn't do that one. Ensure the board and staff have up-to-date information on the latest reuse and recycling advancements and opportunities. On hold, timing unknown, that's just on hold. Develop a plan for maximizing reuse and recycling of biosolids, 1.3. That's a future item, it hasn't been dealt with.
They were actually,
Oh,
you know,
go ahead. You're actually what?
Kitchen, you should probably be best to respond to that. We're actually working with someone to have a rotary drum thickener come in, so the solids content going out should be better, and our solids destruction and digestion should be better by increasing the overall detention time.
So I don't want to get bogged down in that, but there's progress
Yes.
underway.
In short, there is progress.
Work in progress, yep.
Okay, good. Accomplish the long-term goal of evaluating and implementing additional reuse and recycled water options with the ideal goal of zero discharge. I put timing is the future, is that correct? Okay, so those are more or less on hold. We see there's a lot of interest in recycled water, but the organization has not been able to deal with that. Goal 2, outreach and communication. Develop and approve a communication plan. The plan was completed, I understand, earlier this year, but there's no direction or activity on implementation. Because I would summarize from my own perspective without really knowing, because the organization just can't really have a communication program while it's in the middle of all these struggles. Stop me if, we're just taking a tour, but stop me if I'm going too fast. Finance. Resolve the IPS issue by the end of 2017. To be implemented for fiscal year 2018-19. Well, that's on a different track, right? That's on the mediation, then possibly litigation track, so that's on hold. Not directly controlled at all by the staff. Simplify the budget process. There was concern about the budget process. There's some work that's been underway, I don't know what it is, but that's obviously something we're probably gonna grapple with here again. Set reserve standards. I don't know what's happened with that, I believe it's just kind of on hold. Again, the details maybe don't matter given our limited time, we can deal with any of these later if people have a question. Or if you just have a quick question, please ask it. Seek grant funding, I know there's efforts to do that, and that's just an ongoing effort. Staff and the board, develop a succession plan. It was timed for next year, so it hasn't been dealt with, but it's planned. Ensure adequate staff training. I believe that a plan has been developed, but there's a debate about implementation and the cost of implementation, so that's sort of, I guess, on hold in a certain sense. Resolve debate about staffing. How many staff do we have? Do we have the right number? There was an analysis. I believe that the study that was paid for and done was more or less decided wasn't correct or was disagreed with, and it's sort of on hold. I believe, as we mentioned earlier, there's some retirement and some succession challenges coming. Prioritize safety, that goes on.
Can I ask a
Yes,
question?
go ahead.
Is that analysis a document?
Mhm.
And is it possible, I don't think I've ever seen it, so I'd be curious to see it.
That was the one that was done by MRG, and it was on at a board meeting, so I can certainly, I think it's on our website, but I can certainly make sure that everyone
I've
has it.
looked at all the docs on the website,
Okay,
but
so-
anyway, that's just,
yeah.
as we see this, I'm thinking,
Mhm.
oh, wait, really? I missed that, so, thanks.
There's so many docs on the website. that-
Yeah, they're good, it's a good, yeah, thanks.
Conduct an annual board self-evaluation. I just believe there was no action on that. It was thought that it should be done when new officers are chosen in January. That could be done this year if you choose. Conduct an annual general manager performance evaluation. The last one was 2017.
2016.
2016, okay, we need to mistake there. So definitely overdue. Outside suggestion, definitely something that should be completed. There's a process that's been mostly planned and it could be implemented fairly rapidly, I think. Clarify the roles and ways of working together most effectively. We've talked about that again. That there's been ongoing struggles with that. So we've talked about some ways of dealing with that. I think we're likely to deal with that today. Develop and implement an orientation for new directors. I believe that was completed and implemented
Yes.
for the first time with this election.
No, it was done actually in 2016 because our first new director was Director Penrose, and so we went through that process with Director Penrose, and it included both a binder of information, sitting down and talking about the budget, as well as a tour of the treatment plant. So we just haven't had a new director since then.
Good. More could be done with that. I know you have some new directors coming. It is often very challenging to get rolling in an organization like this, and there could be more work on that, I would suggest. But that was a good start. Goal 5, infrastructure, operations, and maintenance. Develop a 5-year asset management plan. It was developed. I believe there's been ongoing struggles about what it really means, how things were prioritized, were they prioritized right, what procedures were done right, who's the best engineer to do a study, all sorts of things. So in reality, it's been difficult for it to really be operational, even though it's complete. Extrapolate 20-year costs from the above report. That was from the strategic plan in 2016.
That was on our agenda last.
It was on your agenda last week, so it came to you.
It actually was in April presented. We were asked to go back and try to get input from the member agency managers and potentially their engineers. And so I know Kishan had been working on that. Obviously, throughout this whole period of time, it's been open for any feedback, and we received very little feedback. So in preparation for the next budget process, we wanted to bring it back to the board, which is why it was on the agenda last time.
Okay, good, and I think that's an example of this difficulties with communication, with process that everyone understands. Obviously, it has gone through some kind of process, but I know through the interviews I had last week, some of you were surprised about it, some of the managers expressed surprise about it, yet nonetheless, it had been marching along and there had been some communication. The question is, do we have an adequate process? Are we following it? Are we being disciplined about it? You know, if you miss your opportunity, you get to hold something up in the future. How do things work? Develop a long-term, this comes out of that, 5.3, develop a long-term reasonable perspective and concrete spending terms of potential alternative approaches to managing the system. So this is sort of a highfalutin idea. I'm not saying it's a bad one. It's, can we do something much better, more, you know, something creative, something new, something more environmentally favorable or less costly, some completely new way of dealing with the way we do things. And that's obviously a challenge for an organization that's struggling to just do its basic work. But I think it does represent the idea that many of you have some strong feelings about the environment, doing things well, and you would like to have high-flying goals, but we've got to achieve the low-flying ones first. Ensure SAM remains fully compliant with all regulatory requirements. Well, that's basic. Operations and maintenance should be proactively planned, and the board should be kept up to date on progress. We're struggling with that. We're talking about possible new ways of working on that. SAM is committed to providing quality collection system maintenance service for the coast side, and this has to do with the question of whether it would continue to serve all the member agencies. Half Moon Bay, I think, has decided to move on. And some of it had to do with the resourcing and the cost of adding new people. I think my understanding is with Half Moon Bay leaving, that once that happens, the staff is more or less the right size at that point.
That's correct.
And sort of resolve whether we hire more staff or not.
Well, and the staff position that's there is not more staff. It's replacing a person who left. It isn't adding.
Okay.
It's a matter of if we had a long-term contract with the city of Half Moon Bay, it would make sense to fill that position. Since the contract only was a year, it didn't make sense to go through the recruitment process and hire someone who would most likely be laid off
Right,
when that contract ended.
got it. Thank you for clarifying. Before we ask you about what you think of individual things, does anyone have a question, not a comment, a question about any of these? What does it mean, what really happened or didn't happen, or I don't understand it, or anything at all? Okay. What I'd like to do is take a little time, and I know it seems like the mood of the room is to get on to this very concrete activity probably over here of doing something with the budget and our procedures for working together. And we'll see what we do, but I would like to pause and ask you, if you look at your agenda, right in the middle under 4, I'd like you to take a little bit of time, it may take you 10 minutes, I don't know, look through the strategic plan and ask yourself, given everything we've heard so far today, and thinking about what we really want to achieve or not achieve, what should we do with these strategic plan items? Are there things that you want to add? Either a whole new goal area perhaps, or a new objective or priority? Is there something we need to add? Is there things we should keep in there or modify them to some degree and keep them? Are there things we should eliminate or put on hold, and maybe even put on hold or eliminate even if we think they're good, but take them out of the active strategic plan? Because I know from talking to Beverly that if it's in the plan, she's going to try to do it, and it will divert staff resources, and it will muddy up things with detail for all of you. And I'll bring up one other idea. More than one of you brought up the idea, and I think it would be worth considering that in the end, if this strategic plan fit on one page, and it had a little statement and 5 or 10 bullets, and said, these are the couple of things we want to get done for sure, absolutely. And all the rest got put into cold storage, even if they're great ideas, that wouldn't be bad. You could put that piece of paper right on the wall up there, we could make a poster, and you could say, we're trying to do 3 things this year. Of course, you keep the store open. Staff does the collection system, the treatment plant, safety, all these things happen, keeping the doors open, keeping the store running. But are there just 1 or 2 extra things that we think are important for us to achieve if we're going to make some progress there? Or should we have a bunch of things, and what should it look like? So I would like to ask each of you to think through, not all this is how it looks now. What are we gonna add? What are we gonna edit? What are we gonna eliminate? What are we gonna maybe put on hold? What do you recommend? And we're just gonna collect that. We're not gonna debate it. After that, then we get to the debate where we're gonna come to some decisions together. So take a few minutes. Maybe you can cross out whole things or say keep whole things or whatever, however you wanna mark it up, you're gonna verbally comment back to us.
Are you talking about goals and objectives only on this, or are you talking about mission, vision,
I think
and
you should comment on
approach?
anything on this, yes. The mission
Okay.
and vision and these approach to fulfilling the mission and vision.
Thank you.
All 7 pages.
Yeah, and I know that's a lot, but you don't have to look at every word, like we can come back and nitpick over individual like wordsmithing. It's more like, this whole category, let's keep or let's change this a little. I'm not asking for wordsmithing.
And you're suggesting marking what we care to either with an A, a B, or a C.
I would say, add.
Or
keep,
individual
edit,
comments.
Yeah, add, keep, edit, or delete, put on hold. Just any phrasing you want. We're gonna collect the mess of it and hear from each other.
Collect it, you mean,
I'm gonna verbally,
report, you're gonna
we're
write down.
gonna go one by one through this and try to move a little quickly, so I don't want wordsmithing. Just like, let's get rid of that one, let's keep that one, but I wanna change a few words or whatever you want to do. you end up with a lot of notes, I wouldn't mind maybe getting it at the end.
I thought you were gonna be collecting these.
I can, I didn't wanna take them from you yet, but if I collect them, I would appreciate that, that would be great. But if you're writing personal notes on there and you don't wanna give it to me, that's okay too, but if you
I
can give it.
just wanted to make a verbal.
Yeah, yeah, well, the verbal's the main thing, but if you're writing a lot of notes, I'll take those too. Yeah, yeah.
I actually downloaded a ton of stuff from the website, maybe I just missed that one somehow, 'cause it looked, because I remember I read the staffing analysis before, but I didn't realize there was an additional.
No, that's the same one,
Oh, just the report from that agency, wasn't that from a lot longer ago than June
2017.
of this year?
It was 2017.
Oh, okay, it said 18, that's why I think.
That was the goal. That was the goal, was to be completed by, whatever it was to be completed by.
Oh, okay, I thought there was more of the analysis than
No.
that was. Okay, thanks, because I
That was-
already read that.
The answer to the question. There's a great document that is in the new director orientation. I don't think so because we weren't on the same board, but,
Oh, that's true, yeah.
it's in that binder for orientation, but it's also on the website, if you go to the About tab.
Okay.
Just the
Yeah.
place, which is on
You
the
said
top.
documents,
No, just
Oh.
About.
okay.
And it talks about how SAM was created. There are two documents, and one of them is a JPA for citizens guide.
Oh,
And
okay.
it talks about how JPAs work. and get sort of that general purpose and how that two-hat thing works.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
You'll be getting a binder too. Second engine on if you want.
I have most of the stuff in here. I pulled up a bunch of stuff to get ready for this too. This one, I don't know what this one means.
Yeah, well, you got it now. You're almost retired.
Clemens is ill.
Bob Nisbet is coming, I know.
Right.
Yes, right, that's.
Yeah, Chuck couldn't fly up here. So.
There was always Skype.
It was raining.
Hmm?
It was raining, so, yeah. No, wait, that's that other guy. That's
And Clemens is ill. He could not, he didn't get his agenda out for us on Friday like normal. He's in bed.
Yeah, he told us that after the meeting we had with him. He said,
Oh
I'm
my
feeling
God.
really bad.
Oh,
Just
by
said
the
nothing.
You
way,
know, I thank God for local
As we're
politics. I
walking
think I
into the
told you
meeting,
that last week. Thank
was
God for
shaking
local
hands when I
politics.
told
At least it's something I can get my hands around,
okay.
you know? Oh. And it helps me not think about national politics.
I don't spend a lot of time thinking about the forthcoming indictments in local politics. Whereas I spend a lot of time thinking.
I was from New York. So, you know, like what, 20, 25 years later,
Squeezed, aren't we?
this guy, we live in the same.
Everybody?
Yeah, mine too.
Before you leave today, I have to tell you a story about my wife and a work around.
Whenever I hear all this banter, and even laughter, I know it's time to stop. Get back to work.
Back.
Let's
I
get
know we're
serious
missing a
again.
couple of people, but while we're waiting, I wonder if it might be helpful for Bob if everyone would just say their name. I think you were introduced to some of us and you know some of us.
Be helpful to hear him again,
Yeah.
yes, thank you.
You wanna start, Jim, and just
Yeah,
go around this way?
Jim,
Jim,
Rick Loman, we
Yep.
just met again.
Catherine.
Debbie Ruddock.
David Seaton.
Martin Roush.
Lauren.
Barbara died.
Deborah Penrose.
Scott Boyd.
Tim Costello.
We met, yep.
All right. Do we have everyone? I think we do. Let's get back to where we were, and let me just say that normally what we would do is we would take our time and patiently work the rest of the day through each of these things. What I'm hoping to do is kind of fly through this section here and get onto what I think we want to get onto, which is talking about some of these procedures or some of these policies, these new ways of working together. But I want to see what you have to say before we decide what we're doing. I wonder if we could just start, because Debbie's looking at me so ready to go. And we'll see how to do this. So this is a compressed on-the-fly attempt to try to get a lot of information really quick. Why don't you start with just goal 1, reuse and recycling, unless you want to talk in a different way about it.
Well, I sort of had a way to overwrite.
Why don't you do that?
Okay. So I just was looking in my mind at how to structure everything that was there.
Uh-huh.
That made sense for where we are now. And I was thinking we might consider, reorganizing everything into two categories. The first being, sort of organization or organizational development.
Mhm.
And, we could put process, roles, staffing, and budget and finance under that. We were talking about, our internal review process and communications. So maybe that could be an umbrella category as organizational development, because
Okay.
that's where a lot of our issues are. Those are foundational to me. And then the second category would be like infrastructure. So one would be internal processes, procedures, people, and the other would be, facilities and
Okay,
tools and all that stuff.
right, sure. Okay, do you have specific comments, or that's your offering here?
That's,
About-
yeah, that's my general offering.
Okay.
I think if we wanted to spend the time, we could go through, assign most of the subcategories of the goals underneath those two categories, was my take on that.
Let me ask you another question. So we could definitely assign things, that'd be pretty easy, just a mechanical process practically. What are your thoughts about the idea that we want to keep a lot of this stuff, or most of it in, because it's good things to have on the record and for staff to have on their plate, versus, let's assume they're gonna keep the store open and do most regular things they're supposed to do, like safety and all sorts of things. And we just wanna call out a couple or a handful of things that we want to focus on and make sure for sure we get done with. What is your thought? We'll come around,
Yeah,
but
okay.
what is your thought about that?
So I kind of did that exercise, Let's just go back. As far as, goal one, reuse and recycling, I kind of, I thought about what could we do in the coming year, and it seemed like people wanted to revisit it. So I was thinking maybe just sort of one sub-goal would be resume agency discussions, starting with a recap of current status, identify obstacles and opportunities for moving it forward. So rather than all of those subcategories, that seemed to me to be a good place to start, and that might take even a year, because there were some differences of opinion among the agencies, including the water district, about how to move forward.
So your thought is, let's just have ongoing discussions so we keep it on the table.
Or resume discussions, we
Resume
haven't been even
discussions,
doing it,
okay.
so.
Okay, good. And I'm assuming you don't have a trouble with the rest of those objectives, you're just, we're not there. Is that-
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
Debbie, would that include kind of relaunching the existing committee we had at the time and
Yeah, that's kind of what I was
just
thinking.
get them back together and then?
Yeah, and actually I thought like it might be helpful for us to have, rather than all of us just getting together and, sort of randomly talking about what we want, having a facilitated discussion, actually hiring a facilitator as we resume discussions to try to get us on the same page, identify the obstacles, much as we're doing today. But if we really want to get the water conversation moving forward, I think we need to be more organized about it.
okay. Well, good, thank you, that was a very succinct comment. David, what are your thoughts on just either some global comment or just on reuse recycling?
I think kind of the global comment is, to your point, I think it's useful to have everything stay in terms of a reference, but to try to turn it into one executive summary that kind of solidifies what is our true, goals that we're gonna make sure that we hit, whereas the other ones, they hold us accountable, but, so I think that would be nice. Do you also wanna go into, additional ideas, or wait on that?
Only on recycling.
Only on recycling, okay. Okay, I thought you were talking.
Or global.
Yeah, just on terms of that, yeah, so otherwise,
So you're
with
talking
recycling-
about keep them, so we have them, but have some identification of core priorities.
Yeah, and in that executive summary, so that something like water, that it sounds like that's a top priority for everyone here. The specifics behind the metrics for how we're gonna hold ourselves accountable, instead of kind of a general statement, we all support it, and, which we all do, how are we gonna hold ourselves accountable in a year for you to come back and say, did you guys succeed or fail in one thing?
Got it. Thank you, David. Leonard?
Well, the only thing I have, goal one, Debbie stole my thunder, I wrote in 1.0, identify current impediments.
Okay.
So I think that actually needs to be done before we go back to having the more inclusive meetings. Start out at the sandboard level with as many of the recycled water committee members as you can round up, if there's one.
Right.
And try and write down what the impediments were.
Leonard, would it be fair to link identifying impediments with resuming discussions as maybe an initial step, but part of this, what Debbie was describing, let's just kind of get rolling again. And identifying impediments is obviously part of.
From what I know, resuming the discussions is not gonna get anywhere. I think need to start out listing what the impediments were, why did it fall apart?
What if it were facilitated though?
Yeah, I like Debbie's comment about facilitating can take care of
Captured.
Leonard. So
Okay.
if you have a facilitator, you can
Organized
pull out the
system.
impediment. and-
Might help.
Does that accomplish it? Barbara?
Well, when I went through it for a
Can I
lot of,
interrupt you for one moment, Barbara? I'm sorry, Bob, did you get a copy of the plan? We had a piece of
Last
paper.
year's I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking.
Well,
at it.
but no, do you have the annotated one?
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry.
it's okay, no
Sorry,
problem. I went through and sort of picked out a lot to combine and simplify.
Okay.
Because I think there's way too many goals and targets in here. And I wanted to pull out a lot of operations things, like we could have one goal for efficient operations that would include some of the plans and reports that are provided through this, which we want to have. But, there's, plans and reports, communications, safety, compliance, emergency preparedness. They don't need to be in the strategic plan. Those are just, the strategy there is to run things properly and report using existing plans to provide ongoing review. But that's just one, take it out of miscellaneous areas.
Okay,
And then for the others, I would say combine and simplify.
all right. Do you
And I have a
some
lot of
notes?
specifics, but I have too many specifics to, I think, go through one by one.
On recycling specifically, do you have any comments?
Well, I said combine 1, 2, and 4 into one reuse recycling goal that's achievable.
Okay,
And I think, not having participated before, facilitated discussion seems like a good way to get going. Also, maybe pull together some of the background documents for me.
Barbara, I mean,
Yeah, I'm in complete accord with the suggestions up here.
this one,
Resume discussions with a facilitator, I think those are the two main things. And I think the discussion should be done through a committee before it's brought to the board.
okay.
I think the committee's a much more useful vehicle. And then in terms of globally, you want a statement on global?
Go ahead, sure.
Yeah, I don't think we even should be looking at this document. I think it was proved to be pretty useless in terms of our achieving anything. We achieved a few things in here, but I don't think we're ready to have a strategic plan yet. My sense is if we can accomplish, number one, identify and clarify the role of the member agency managers, the SAM manager and the board, that if we could get that accomplished this year, I would be thrilled.
And maybe budget process.
Well,
would be
the
part of
idea was to maybe attempt to clarify those rules, identify those rules through the budget process.
Okay, good. Thank you. Scott?
So first on recycled water, it's been a while, but we actually had a lot of stuff where we were all on the same page, and we just had some next steps, but we've had to set that on the sideboard for a while. I think a facilitator could do really well to start by gathering up where we were and what we were imagining as next steps, and just do that groundwork to give us the kickstart to get right back into the swing of things. I think it's a great idea. And on the, to your point, that I like the way you put it, what I was imagining was something like a 2019 goals sheet, one page, that has, we want to do this and we want to do that. And if you want to know where all that came from, here's this background. but just kind of hoist that out and say, here are the 2 or 3 things that we really want to get done in 2019. And I think, it's a start with like maybe our statement, the purpose or whatever, and then from there, 1, 2, 3. So be really focused, and at every meeting we could go, are we working on the things that we said were the top priorities? Keep it front and center.
Yeah, okay, good. Beverly,
I'm just listening.
all right. The old man of
This
the,
was, this exercise I felt was more like geared towards the board, this portion. I mean, really, it's
sure,
my job, Everly's job, petition to implement whatever they decide, so.
given your age and experience, do you have any comments?
I am a protected class, I'll have you
Old
know.
man of the sun.
He started working here as a toddler.
Yeah, I know. Okay, so we'll move on.
I thought with, besides reuse and recycling, we could also add developing plan for energy efficiency or alternate sources, renewable energy sources, so that they all can come under one group.
You would group that. Okay. Bob, I know you just kind of arrived out of the blue, but do you have any comments?
I don't. I probably have some questions, but I don't want to set the discussion back a step, so I'm okay for now.
Yeah. Normally, I would want to entertain your questions, but I think we're trying to race through something. at the
Understood.
moment. Jim?
I think I echo what Deborah and Scott said about identifying the top priorities in the
Okay.
recycled water.
Okay.
I think, what I had down is restart the committee, which has
Okay.
been nailed there several times.
Right.
I like the idea of facilitating it.
Mhm.
And I'd like to also add that we've obviously received criticism from the community as not doing anything.
Right.
And to me, the recycled water project, I mean, all the restructuring, that's super important. But it's not gonna be obvious to the audience out there or our consumers. But if we could do recycled water, that's something everybody can, 90% of the people wondered if something like that, and say, look what we did. Boom, we got recycled water. And everybody would say, well, they can do something. So,
Okay, good. Catherine?
I'm going to use Leonard as my role model and just be blunt. Until the lawsuit and the budget details are ironed out, I, for one, cannot see, I think all of this would be a waste of time and money. We had plans, we had next steps, we had all that stuff for recycled water. The lawsuit got filed. What? If Montera is going to be paying for the majority of the IPS, we're not gonna have money for recycled water. Granada might have the same problem. So I think we need to iron those things out first. We also need to iron out the roles of the general managers. If we have 3 agency general managers and then the board and general manager at SAM pulling different, and the fractionated board pulling different directions for different whatevers, it's just, again, more spinning and not productive. And one of the impediments that Leonard, that has been identified is, I think each agency, and we need to have an agreement to that each agency keeps the rights to whatever water it comes down here. The new technologies in recycled water are such that outlier recycling water facilities are actually possible for a reasonable price, and having a centralized plant is not necessarily the best engineering option. And Granada might decide it needs to recycle its water to take care of its medians and other park needs, and Montera may decide we need to do it for groundwater recharge. So until those issues are worked out, but primarily the lawsuit and the roles of the managers, and the budget process itself, I just think, as much as I like recycled water, it's those other things have a greater priority.
Okay.
I hadn't thought of that, but I want to agree with Catherine's statement that the lawsuit is a big impediment now.
I want to build on what Catherine said with just one comment, not related to the content of what Catherine said, the lawsuit and all of that, but the possible consideration of a hyper-focus on a few things, which is this organizational fix and communication fix and maybe the budget, CIP, or just, I do have one experience with a client. It was an agricultural water district in the Central Valley, and they lost their 100% of their water supply for 2 years during the drought. And they had a lot of long-range plans. They had about 3 years of water in groundwater storage. And when that hit, they were already a far-sighted organization, but what they did was they had a meeting like this, and they had no idea which way to go. Water is very difficult for ag in the Central Valley right at the moment. And what they did was they took their general manager, who was the best sort of water manager, and they relieved him of 100% of all his responsibility. In fact, they took him out of the district so he wouldn't interfere or be engaged in day-to-day work, and they said, look, we can't figure out what to do here, so we're gonna make our general manager 100% focus on solving this one problem. And he did that. They reorganized, and the organization ran without him, essentially. He came in just for board meetings and periodic things. They gave him a support staff. Obviously, we're not talking about doing that, but I thought about that when Catherine brought up the idea of focusing on getting a few core things done. I'm not trying to give you direction, I'm just bringing it up. It occurred to me that we may want to go that far. Anything else? I don't want to debate. Again, I keep holding off debate. I don't want to debate about this. We've all heard each other. Does anyone else have another comment now that we've heard everyone? Just another idea, another thought, something you want to throw in? Otherwise, we're going to move to the next one. We're trying to push ourselves here. Okay. The second one is outreach, education, and communication. The shortest one, I think. Let's just start somewhere else, just for the fun of it. How about Scott? You want to you got a comment on that? And it wouldn't be bad if, as we talk, if you have a comment about the global ideas, like what you're thinking as we move along about sort of everything else. And if you don't, then fine, we'll stick to it.
Yeah, I don't have a particular comment on that.
Okay. You keep it, you leave it alone, you get rid of it, or you're indifferent?
I think we ought to have a committee that keeps an eye on it. I mean, Rick has long been interested in that kind of thing, and I've never disagreed with that, really.
So you'd have a committee?
Yeah, that looks for the opportunities to do some outreach and communication, looking for, what do we need to be putting out there? And we've got different channels for doing it. We can do it through our member agencies, or we can do it other ways, press releases, events, whatnot, and we've done all of those kind of things, so.
Okay, so
Shouldn't be left to chance.
can I just raise a question, and Beverly, correct me if I don't have the facts right. Last time there was a thought to have something more ambitious. We need to communicate about this organization. We need the world to know what we're doing and all of that. I assume, Scott, you're not at that level. You're simply saying when there's something to communicate about, we should go ahead and do it, not saying.
No, I think you should have an idea of how we're gonna approach that, and then look for the times when communicating and doing outreach helps us out. Not leave it to chance, but I don't think we need to spin up an entire organizational effort to,
That's the
we don't
question.
need a marketing and communications director
Right.
kind of role, but I think we should have a,
What's the pay on that one?
but, we should know how we're gonna go about that.
Okay.
Are you saying just create a policy that describes what?
No, I think the
I
committee.
started from the position of, I don't have a lot to say on this topic, so I'm gonna.
Let's come around to.
I had said that I wanted to keep the committee,
Mhm.
but to make it an effective committee. And I like the idea of using the vehicle of recycled water as maybe a message that Sam is sending. I think Sam got a very bad rep over the past year or two with our spills. I think if we could put something positive out there, it would be very good, and bad rep because of the lawsuit. be nice to be able to talk about something positive like recycled water, so I like Rick's idea of using that as a vehicle that the committee could work through.
Are you envisioning a moderate effort versus the sort of major push we talked about last year?
Yeah, I think we start out moderate and see how it goes.
Okay, let's come around then.
Well, I marked, just take this out of the goals for the year ahead, since it's a good thing, but it's a minor thing. I mean, if we're trying to focus our energy into actually accomplishing a couple big things that are gonna make a big difference. There is a communication plan, right, that's been approved?
Yes.
The way I read this, so it seems as if maybe there could be a committee to review an occasional outreach, but I see this as I understand what you're saying about wanting to improve the public perception of the agency, but, you know, if we're looking at focusing our time and energy on doing things better, this seems to me definitely a second tier and operations issue.
Okay. Leonard.
I think that Sam in some part has a bad reputation out there, took a lot of flack, I guess it was this year, last year, for not communicating to the community about the big spills. So I think this one is easily solvable without making a really big deal out of it and policies and all that. And that is to have Sam get, can't remember what Nextdoor calls it, but there's a special account that government representatives can get. So the general manager should be able to get this special account on Nextdoor that lets her post to all the communities without having to demonstrate residence in communities. And then things that the community needs to know about right away can go out on Nextdoor in addition to whatever else. I mean, that's such an easy, simple solution that, you know, we don't have to spend a year talking about how to do it.
Okay, thanks. So, I don't wanna cut you off, Leonard, I don't wanna talk too much about exactly what we would do just because of time.
Well, like I'm saying, you know, let's not have this big, long, complicated process with meetings and all that, let's just, you know, do something easy now.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything. I think to Leonard's point, Nextdoor and social media are things that could take, 2 minutes of time and get out to our target market, exactly what we need to do. In terms of other outreach, when I looked at this, kind of going back to the game changer type thing that I think we need to pull our community into. I look at the only way we're gonna solve the real fundamental issues. I think the lawsuit outstanding creates an opportunity to do this, but the only way to actually do it long-term sustainably is have a series of like moderated debates or discussions with board members and members of the community. Whether it was one in Montero, one in Albemarle, one in Hudson Bay, over the course of a year, where we really get out all of the big, the bigger underlying issues, because at the end of the day, that's the most difficult thing, is any one of these solutions do have some of these underlying other issues that kind of squirm up when we go to address one thing and something else, so.
Are you arguing to do something like that now, or you're talking about later?
I'm saying to, start planning that, maybe the first one is late next year, and then a series of a couple other ones where we would pull the public into it, and it'd be facilitated debates where we could really get these, big issues out into the open in terms of the longer term strategic planning of how everything should be operated.
Okay.
I came down on the same side as Barbara, of just eliminating this one for the time being. We now have the OpenGov portal, and we did, I believe, adopt a policy about communicating about spills. I think never probably did that.
We did.
Yeah, and I think the best thing we can do is to work on our organization. The better we operate, the more credible we are, and we don't have to rely on, like spinning things with the public. That
Right.
We'll have the credibility to communicate openly and honestly. So I wanna work on the other stuff.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Catherine?
I'm kind of in between. First of all, this was done, as Beverly note, as the note says on 6/30/18 by the ops committee, and it hasn't gone anywhere. So let's get another committee so we can spend our time and then go nowhere and do nothing. Hello? Committees are good for policy, they're slow and cumbersome and don't work for anything to do with operations. If we need to have somebody for social media, we should have a social media, not a consultant who's doing all this fancy stuff, but a social media respondent that we hire on our part-time to reflect the, or, gosh, we have a general manager who does excellent press releases. We should, and talks to the press a lot, so I guess that's covered. And perhaps each of the member agencies should look in the mirror and say, what are our managers doing and saying that takes Sam down a notch? Aren't we all supposed to be working on this together? And why are we slamming Sam when we are Sam? So I would like to go back to having the ops committee suggestions brought forward. That was only 6 months ago. And go from there, or after the officers are selected and the committees are selected, go back to maybe giving the ops committee the ability to direct the general manager and not have to bring everything back to the board. Because board process is slow, a lot of things get continued.
Okay, so to summarize, you're suggesting a very moderate approach of some sort. where
Yes.
We take some kind of action, but it's not some strategic program, it's simply get some work done.
Yeah.
Two quick comments. One, I like the next door philosophy because if Sam has obsolete old equipment, they could just sell it on next door at the same time. Get 2 for
Oh,
1.
the
Or
backer,
donate.
you would have a whole line of backer
Herbal
truck folks.
There you go.
My other comment is I'd like, when we were campaigning and standing in front of post offices, and I would say I worked on El Granada and Sam, people gave me the blankest of all looks
I know, I know.
and said, every single person, what's Sam?
No idea.
Well, that's 'cause you
No
said-
idea that
you
we
said
are
Sam
here.
instead of the sewer bill.
So what I would like to reconsider at some point, and I know the newsletter was killed because people thought it was an excess cost and agencies were doing newsletters. I would like to readdress that at some point. If we're gonna have an outreach committee, then Sam does things differently and does different things than the agencies do, and sometimes the agencies aren't gonna cover Sam orientation. If we're gonna outreach to the community, I would like to look that as an we're not gonna have one way to communicate. That might be a good one too, every quarter or something, sending out a nice little newsletter.
Okay,
Just address that in the future.
all right.
And my general thought is, it doesn't need to be a major thing. I would support organizing the committee and let them just run in parallel. I don't think that takes anything away from the big things we're all talking about.
Okay, so a basic effort. All right, thank you. Coming around, Jim?
Yeah, echo what Rick says, I mean, it's not gonna be a major item for us going forward. We should be fast, though, we should be able to reply to emergencies easily next door, I mean, it's a good idea, too.
I don't necessarily want to debate this now, but I would question whether this group can be on the same page enough at the moment to allow a committee of a few or your general manager to put out public outreach and all be okay with it in reality. I don't think we need to debate that. Maybe someone wants to make a quick comment about that, but I really wonder if we're still in pie in the sky land with these ideas.
If the board doesn't have enough faith in the general manager to put out an announcement on next door, then we have a real problem.
I don't know if it's faith in the general manager versus just common agreement
I
on it.
wouldn't
Yeah.
farm it out to the committee, though. I think it has to be the general manager.
Yes.
Okay,
But the general manager has a lot to do in tracking next door
Yeah,
might be a bit much, and since there's so much on next door.
Yeah, I think it wouldn't be useful for us to decide exactly what kind of methodologies, that's kind of down in the
Right.
weeds, but we've talked about some kind of moderate program. We've talked about it being implemented as directly as possible through the general manager and or committee. That can be worked out later. We're trying to get onto some bigger things here. Goal 3, finance. That was one of the, I guess not longer, it's got 4 items. I wonder if we just do the exact same thing, maybe start with Rick, just moving around. And while you're commenting on this, are you having any changing thoughts on the global big picture about how targeted we are, how broad we are? Any comments on finance?
Well, the kind of comment I had was, and again, it's very generic, but we have a very intelligent community out there, I think. It's certainly an above average. If we have financial issues and if we have infrastructure that needs to be replaced, I attended a meeting in Sacramento one time, and the agency that loans money to everybody, and we wouldn't be looking at loans here because Sam technically doesn't have any money, but their number one priority in granting loans was, does the agency have the courage to raise rates when necessary? If they feel an agency won't raise rates, they don't get money. And my thought is, if we have an infrastructure problem that needs to be solved, we go out and tell the community, here's the problem, and here's how much money we're gonna need to do that. So it's bringing the community in on our side and just telling the truth. Everybody knows we've got aging infrastructure, but my goal would be to create the plan to fix it and then tell people this is what it's gonna cost. We'll get grants, we'll do all this, but we're behind the ball right now and need to fix it.
Okay.
And be honest with them.
And
I think you get support. Every time everybody's afraid of raising rates and, oh, we're gonna kick out of office, and every rate increase I've seen, you get 4 or 5 protests out of thousands and thousands of people. So I think we ought to just take it to the public and say, this is what we need to do, folks. We're your agents, and this is what we need to do.
When you're here, you're taking it to the member agency publics, right?
Well, however we do that, but say, this is what it's gonna cost.
Do you have any comments on the specific items there?
No, we've talked about the budget process and reserves, and all those need to be worked out. I don't have
Okay.
anything additional
Okay,
on those.
Jim?
Yeah, I would keep the first 3,
Mhm.
and as it being important, and the grant funding, I think would be something that we lower, we can lower priority item. Once we have grants, and we recycle water, we need that, but it's nothing is being really contingent. That's on a high priority.
Okay. Coming around, any of the staff, Beverly, Scott,
This is solid material.
what?
What we have there is,
Is it good?
it's there for a reason.
Right. Coming around, Deborah?
Yeah, I would agree with Rick's position.
Okay.
I'm supposed to say I doubled.
And as far as the specific items, would you like to keep items like that in the plan? Maybe not in every detail, but
Yeah, I think we have to work on the budget, but I think we have to figure out how we're gonna do the budget, and that goes back to identifying and clarifying the role of the member agencies and the sand manager board, so to me, this is secondary.
it's contingent on that.
It's contingent on that,
Okay.
yeah.
Barbara?
well, I think number 2 and 3 could be combined
Uh-huh.
and could be the goal. Number 1, I don't think it really belongs in the board goals while the lawsuit is happening. It seems as if that's what the lawsuit's about. That's this, yes, all these things are important for the board to do, but they're not to be done necessarily outside of resolving the lawsuit. Resolving the lawsuit will resolve the first one. That's just my thinking on it, that's a lot there.
Right.
And if we could do 2 and 3, that would be a really achievable goal. And it would affect number 1.
Okay. Leonard?
The other thing I wrote down is on 3.3, set reserve standards on hold, or why? I don't understand why that's on hold. So I think that needs to be,
Beverly, do you have a quick answer to that?
Yeah, the last time we discussed it, it was that we needed to resolve the issue of the funding and sort of who's responsible for what before we could really talk about setting aside funds for capital improvement program. Because who's contributing, how much is contributed, that was the last discussion we had.
but I think that's, that goes to the dollar amounts more and set reserve standards. I read that as policy, and I think the policy needs to go forward and get set now, irrespective of how much the dollar amounts are gonna need to be after other things are resolved.
So you would set the policy and then maybe not fund it until people are ready to do that?
Or start looking to funding it at whatever the minimum possible level might be after everything is settled, and that might require it to be raised later, but there's gotta be some bottom number that can be used to initially fund it.
So you'd set minimum reserve standards, at least.
Well, like I said, set the policy for, like, just to be illustrative of what I have in mind, the policy might be, we have this number of months of day-to-day costs sitting in bank account, and we have a reserve fund for infrastructure that covers the next 4 years worth of expected replacement costs. So
Right.
that's the type of policy, and once you have the policy, then later you can compute the dollar amounts.
Okay. David?
Yeah, these are all fine. I would add maybe a focus on eliminating duplicative costs. I think some of the overlapping costs, some of them are low hanging fruit, I think would be simple. I think there's other ones that not only would it be a cost savings, but I think there would be efficiencies and synergies that would come. The grand jury report that came out, I guess 2-3 years ago now, outlined a chart of overlapping costs specifically that are multiple agencies pay for and can be shared simply by just getting together and say, hey, we could share these costs, it's only have one agency paying for it. Whether they identified some of the software programs and other, there's a whole list that they started. I'm sure we could come up with a much better a list of what they started, not knowing much about how our agencies operate to eliminate some of those overlapping costs. And I think, as the low hanging fruit, I think it's just gonna save money, and that would be great. But I think as we expand on that process, we're gonna find that there's some of the huge cost savings are also gonna lead to more efficiencies.
Okay.
So I'm in favor of, keeping what we have there, pretty much. I would, fold reserve standards into the budget process, so that we really have two, we have 3.1 and 3.2. I think resolving the IPS funding issue is really important, we're talking about $4 million or more. Yeah, that's a big chunk, so I think that, the lawsuit is behind a lot of this, what we're doing, but, I think calling it out is important, so I would leave that as it.
You keep it. I think, Catherine, are you the last one on this topic?
I am. Last but not least. I agree with Debbie, I think the lawsuit on number 1 is critical. I think the other 3 are actually separate from that. And as far as simplify the budget process, I think a timeline is the simplest way to do it. Now, one of the problems we've had is that, some general managers don't tend to like the format that Beverly uses. And, I think it is up to the board has made suggestions, and I think it's up to the board to work with, Beverly on that. But I think a timeline would be most useful, and I think putting it in as a JPA amendment so that it has, and putting some kinds of consequences for not, working within that timeline would be useful.
So what do you mean, like?
I'm not sure what the consequences would be, but I've heard, oh, I didn't get it on time, I didn't understand it, various other rationales. And, I'd like to have Sam take the opinion that if member agencies don't get back to the SAM, general manager in a timely fashion, too bad. And I think reserve standards should be per the best practices. I happen to occasionally listen to a fellow on the radio who's a financial advisor for folks who have gotten themselves in just terrible debt, and it's interesting, his name's Dave Ramsey. And he talks about the basics of finance are having funds set aside for emergencies. And before you fund a whole lot of other things, you make sure you have 6 months worth of funds in addition to emergency funds. So there's two different sets of reserves, and I believe Sam should be looking at basic financial best practices in that regard. It's been torn apart because some managers have abused it, and I think we need to get back. And to your point, Dave, about sharing costs, Sam was getting insurance, was covering insurance and then for each of the agencies, and there was some misunderstanding, and Sam got in some major kind of, Beverly in particular got in some major kind of battering over that. And I suggest that until we have the roles and power structure set out, sharing anything is a formula for even more fragmentation and even more litigation, and the minor savings will end up with major litigation.
Just one more quick comment. When I was on the board, it seemed like pretty much every year we changed something in the budget process. The categories, the inputs, just everything. And so to me, I would like to have, this is a goal for that process we're gonna do, is to somehow get to a point for like 2 consecutive budget cycles have the same format. You know, we all get to something, let's not keep changing the category, you know, let's get all the complaints out and get everybody into one structure. I know Granada had a much simpler system that boom, we popped it up, boom, we all looked at it, questioned a few things, and boom, we're done. I don't think Sam will ever get there, but I'd like to see, you know, debates being about the kinds of things we're gonna buy and pay, and not changing the entire structure every time, because that just creates chaos, and we're all trying, you can't look back at last year and say, oh, you know, we're up by 2% in this category because personnel categories were shifting and infrastructure categories are shifting. You can't compare numbers just easily year by year. It's never gonna be a simple process, but it can be just easier when we can just see, oh, here's what we paid last year, here's what we're gonna pay this year. It's up or it's down, and everybody can just read it, and the public can read it too. That would just be a goal I'd like to see.
Okay, good. And Leonard, you had a comment?
Yeah, you know, I'm not sure I can count how many general managers have been here in the time I've been here.
Every other year.
And each one has had at least one budget format and so I don't understand why Sam's budget is half an inch thick and Granada's budget is 4 pages. because nobody, to my knowledge, has ever complained about Granada's budget being only 4 pages. And it's really easy to understand. So, and, you know, I know the toxicity that comes with this suggestion, but I think that the 4 general managers need to get together and come to some agreement on what the budget format is gonna be.
Could I pause you, Leader? I think that's gonna be a topic coming, so let's talk about it. And that's coming with
And
the budget.
the other thing is that Sam is gonna have to enforce the JPA dictate that the budget is not à la carte. You can't have a member agency saying, oh, we're gonna approve it except for this line item. No, there's no provision for that in the SAM budget. It's either a thumbs up or thumbs down as to what the SAM board approves getting sent out. You either approve the whole thing or you don't. And that à la carte business has been a problem for 16 or 17 years.
Okay. So that's 3. 3 of 5. Staff and board. I know we're kind of charging through this. Let me tell you what I'm thinking of doing here, folks. Going through this so we hear all of this. I know it gets a little tiresome. We're not gonna have time to settle all the small differences.
We got a whole hour, what do you mean?
Yeah,
There's actually a conflict on the end time because the email that went out says 3 o'clock.
I think it's 2 is what it.
The agenda says 2.
And the reason for that is because we only have the videographer until 2 o'clock, so.
So,
We should pass
here's what I'm hoping to do. So we make the maximum.
24.
So that we make the maximum progress. Finish this little process with the next 2. So we've at least heard all the comments on everything. Have an opportunity to identify priorities, a very limited number of priorities, so we can hear out of all of this what each of you think is the very most important things, like 1 thing a person, or maybe 2. I'll think about that as we get there. Then have a little time to talk about this budget process and start to outline some key things and how we're gonna put that together, because it seems clear already that that's gonna be a top item. So we don't leave the room, even though we only have an hour, without grappling with that at least a little, and then figuring out how we're gonna rapidly settle it, because the budget season is now, right, like it's time. So unless someone has a comment or question about that, let's finish number 4 and 5 and go from there. I'd like to, why don't we just start with you, David, and come this way, just to change direction. Number 4, staff and board, do you have any comments about these goals and these objectives?
No, I'm good with everything. You know, I think it kind of ties into everything everyone's talked about already. I would just add maybe a goal for team building. I think at the staff and manager level, I think with the boards, I think anything that can be done in terms of getting outside and not discussing anything related to sewer to build the relationships could go a long way. I think the next one, I know there's been discussion and attempts, but I think communication plan among the agency managers that incorporates not just in-person meetings, but also conference calls that other board members can maybe tie into if they want to, and Skype calls, so that there's no excuses for travel concerns or potentially even being sick or whatever. It's just a matter of, you know, on a regular basis, everyone's on the phone, even if it's for 5 minutes on a conference call or a quick Skype call, whatever, just so there's this kind of constant flow of communication that you would see as one organization would do.
Okay. David?
Oh, so I would drop a lot off
Okay.
of this one. And I would leave us with 2. Conduct the annual general manager performance evaluation and clarify the roles and ways of working together. So in other words, you know, coming up with that organizational outline, roles and responsibilities, et cetera. You know, prioritize safety. I think, you know, the general manager would know enough to do that anyway. Develop a succession plan. I think that we can trust the managers keeping their eye on that and would do that in the case. But I would mainly prioritize 4.6 and 4.7.
Okay.
I know we had a definition, but I believe we need to define who staff is. I agree with Debbie, I think, a lot of these are general manager decisions. And, including adequate staff training and development. I was asking Tim about, AB 123, the sexual harassment training, and it turns out that, not only is the management of SAM trained in that requirement every year, every other year, but so is all of the staff. And that was something we didn't necessarily know about. So it's, and I don't think it's anybody's fault, it's because that's not something that needs to be announced to the board. So I agree with Debbie, but I think we, with Ms. Ruddock, and I think because the role of the board regarding staff is only about the general manager and the attorney, it's not about any staff beyond that. So many of these things, so 6, 7, and 8 relate to board actions, and the others are all for the general manager, and those should be goals for the general manager.
Okay.
I had 4.7 also is the top one, but 4.6 is something in our contract, which we aren't doing.
Right.
So that has to be done.
Right.
That's not even a debatable item as far as I'm
Right,
concerned.
right.
That just needs to be done. So those would be my top two.
Okay, so you're coming down on a simplified thing, kind of like we're hearing.
Well, I mean, those would be the top ones, and again, like a lot of this stuff is under the general manager, as Catherine said.
Okay,
We have to approve the staffing plans,
good. Jim?
Right, again, 4.7 is the top one, and 4.6 is the second one, so everything else we can wait on.
Okay. Scott?
Yeah, I've got 4.6 marked as unnecessary because it's required by contract.
Okay.
4.7 is the one where I want to put some attention, and there, I think what I'm used to in other contexts is tables of what are the, who are the stakeholders, what are the roles, what are the activities, and at each one of those activities, who's got primary responsibility, and who are the stakeholders, and what are their roles at that stage. Kind of works out to a table. I've given you an example in my notes.
Right, it's the thing we've been talking about.
Yeah, but it's a way to like break it down in just a categorical way. You look at it and you go, oh, here's the steps, and here's the role every person plays at each of those steps. And if we all get on the same page about something like that, then we don't have to make it up as we go along. And once we see it, we go, oh, well, wait a minute, so-and-so is a stakeholder and should be able to like speak up here, or maybe we're missing a step somewhere in that path, right? So
Okay.
just visualize it, give ourselves a graphic, and then we don't have to hold it all in our heads.
Okay.
Deborah?
Yeah, I would agree with everyone else. It's 4.7 is my, the one I wanna pay attention to. 4.6 is in the contract. 4.8 is already being done. And the rest of the things are under the purview of the general manager, with the exception of 4.5. And I don't know what to do about that. Conduct an annual board self-evaluation each year at the same meeting when officers are chosen.
Well, I suggest we put it on the agenda. Let's develop a form.
Okay.
Can I evaluate you?
Yes. Yes, I can evaluate you.
Okay.
Well, I agree on 4.7. 4.3 is the one that interests me. It seems to me, all the rest of these I agree are general manager and so forth. 4.3 is really goes back to the whole budget question.
Right.
Because that's what it's about here. It's not about making staffing decisions that the general manager should make. It's a budget question of the costs of staffing. And that seems to me from what I understand how this works, I think there's just a request for an opportunity for the managers to have some input early in the process, which doesn't mean that they would dictate what's there. So when we look at the budget process, I think there, it's my sense, you know, coming into this new, that there's just a piece missing early in the process of input from the member agency managers. And one piece of it is the staffing piece. So I'm happy to take this out of here.
Someone correct me please, because my impression of this is that there's been a general sense among the member managers that staffing should be limited, and that the management has often thought there might need to be another person or more staffing, and there's been loggerheads over that. So
Yes.
whatever's been approved or not approved, it doesn't matter, because in the end, the member managers keep disagreeing with it, and the management keeps agreeing with what they want to do, and it's just been frozen. So it's not just money or logic, it's a competing view about what's the appropriate staff.
And it also applies to operations and infrastructure.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's a deep thing, and it could be resolved if we have this process, and if the board then is satisfied with the process and then defends it after the fact. It's not just a lack of information, it's a loggerheads.
Yeah, I understand that, but it also, as a board member, all I've ever had come to me is sort of grumble, grumble, grumble. And it'd be nice to have at some point the opportunity to really think about those issues.
Yes,
Now that you're on staff?
Yeah,
now's your chance. And it should, you're right, I want to agree with you that this is the place to do it in the budget, so whatever is approved can be implemented by staff and defended, and if it's not approved, then it won't happen either way, whatever happens with staff.
yeah, and other staffing decisions are clearly not
Yeah,
boards,
exactly,
the board's
it's the number of,
role.
Leonard?
Yeah, I agree with Barbara on 4.3. On 4.1, the succession plan, I guess the board can just tell the general manager, start working on it.
She has been.
Yeah, I don't understand why it says timing is future, that isn't really dependent on anything except availability of time from the general manager. And of course, I agree with everybody on 4.7, that's the high priority. 4.8 is marked completed, except that I thought that at a board meeting I requested that the table of contents for that be distributed to all the directors, and I don't recall getting that.
It was.
Okay, so if I go through my email, I
Mhm.
have that.
Your memory is not her
And,
problem.
and I
get
also
100
offered,
emails a day.
and I also offered to make copies of the binder, and Director Reddick was the only other board member, aside from Director Penrose, who was my guinea pig, on what was in that document. Director Reddick was the only one that asked for a copy of the full binder.
Which I don't think I actually ever got.
You did, but it took a while, because it was delivered in your spot several times, and you eventually got it, but
Okay.
it took a while.
I don't know where it is.
Might be useful for every board member to have
all those
one.
binders?
Yeah.
Well, and I had
Yeah.
asked I had asked if everyone on the board wanted it, and generally, no. The response was no, except for Director Ruddick, but I certainly would offer that now. And clearly, if Director Dye is going to be the new representative on SAM, that would be something I would be doing anyway, is putting those together.
Well, why don't we just put it under miscellaneous documents on our website, so anybody can read it, and a larger segment of the population can have an understanding
I
of,
don't see any reason not to.
The document itself is actually it's a combination of a bunch of documents, so it's the budget, it's the strategic plan.
Right.
So everything that is in that binder is actually on the website. It's just
So-
not all in one place, because obviously things like the strategic plan, the CIP, and the budget document are gonna change every year. The rest of it would not likely change.
so for weak-minded people like me, it would be nice to have it all in one place.
Sure.
Yeah, and I have to say that I do a lot online, but for something like this, it's kind of nice to have. I downloaded everything from the website just the other day, but I looked at it and thought, do I find anything in here? You know, so that would be great to have them.
All right, that gets us around, and now we're to infrastructure, operations, and maintenance. Let's, how about Barbara, you wanna tell us what you will do here first? And
Well, I would combine number 1 and number 2. To me, that doesn't, the costs are part of having a plan. Number 5.3, I have no idea what that really means, so, I don't know. 5.4 seems to be an operations thing that doesn't need to be in here. And the same for 5.5, these are things that there should be regular, obviously, the manager has reports on these that come to the board, which is sufficient, seems to me. We don't need to make it a goal to do things properly. 5.6 seems to me needs to be rewritten. And 5.7, same thing. I think that these board updates of things that are going on need to be regular reports, and maybe an overall goal is to sort of spell out which are the things in this document that are either already happening, like the plans and reports, you know, I said this before, communication, safety, compliance, emergency prep, just the things that are already being done that they make reports of don't need to be in here. So I don't really, just backing up, I think, I love the 5-year asset management plan. It's a really nice document, but I was just really surprised preparing for this meeting to discover that none of the things for this year got done. So I'm confused. I will hand it on to someone more experienced.
Let's just come around here.
I would drop 5.2, 20-year cost. So much can change. It's rare to even have 5-year plans, 3-year typical, and so I think 20 is just pointless. On 5.3, you said no wordsmithing, but I would still change decreasing in the 3rd line to controlling.
Okay.
That's a better word.
Yeah.
Because costs are gonna go up, you can't say decreasing there, costs are gonna go up, you just have to control by how much.
What does it mean? Developer perspective.
For 5.5,
I'm with you.
Well, maybe plan.
you know, again,
instead of
that
perspective.
doesn't necessarily have to be any big deal, maybe just an online blog with updates that are interesting, posted there by Sam's staff. And,
Wouldn't that take more Sam staff time, so wouldn't we need to allocate?
and we're not gonna go there, I'm not gonna fall for that, it's not a lot of time.
Just like bang out whatever
And-
comes to
and
mind.
you know that
Spend time
sometimes your
preparing
spell checker
or
doesn't
editing or-
catch everything,
You know,
and Sue should be insured.
Checking
Uh,
checking what you're typing.
On the last one, 5.7, town board needs to decide to fund that, I think that's really important. It says on hold being funded, that needs to be funded, like, immediately. Everybody see the footage of the freeways in Alaska?
How about I-5 in Sacramento,
What happened there?
washed out?
Yeah, you know, I'm
Mean
good
the
with
yellow
everything. I put a star next to 5.3, I think that's a big one. You know, I would also add, a process for disseminating information from the field level up through to all the boards. You know, I think so much stuff that people like Tim have unbelievable ideas, and he communicates it to Beverly, and then it kind of stops there, because realistically, you know, for her to, all the other things that she's working on, send out email to the agency board members, and, you know, there needs to be like a formal process where, whether it's each meeting or whatever, it's like, hey, these are the top 3 suggestions that came from our field, you know, and really driven by the field, where the board members, we could make decisions on that, but it's kind of a process driven by the field, for their suggestions. I think the other one that, it's a little bit more specific, but on the planning of infrastructure, I've been kind of confused about, is like the wet weather overflow plan. We're doubling the capacity of it. When I was asking our general manager, when that plan was, you know, originally, thought about and went into the planning of it, when was the plan to double that capacity? And he said, I don't know, you have to ask Sam about that, and he couldn't answer any questions.
I'll be happy to talk to you.
Okay.
I'd be
So I
happy to
didn't
talk
know
to you.
the answer to that.
Yeah, so I was confused about
That's-
that in terms of why he couldn't answer direct questions, and,
Probably didn't have it off the top of his head.
Okay.
We went through a real process on that.
okay.
Yeah, for years.
Okay.
So I'm kind of coming down with no nonsense Barbara Dye about this one. I think a lot of can be either combined or eliminated, and I thought she gave a pretty good analysis of that. I do think in 5.7, so on a few occasions in the last couple of years, I've asked to see, you know, written document, emergency plan, and have not received one. I don't even know if we have one. If we don't have one, it's not just to maintain one, we need to create one.
We had
And
one
we need to
15
re-
years ago or something.
Why don't we have Beverly answer?
Yeah.
We're actually in the process of doing that in various stages. The first thing that we had to do was our standard operating procedures. You can't really deal with emergencies if you don't have your standard procedures, and we just recently finished that. The next step would be extrapolating that out to emergencies.
So we need to create an emergency plan, you know,
Yes.
based on that. So,
Yes.
and then maintain it.
Yes.
That would be really important to me.
And the needing funding is clearly where we are with that, because to try and have staff do that at the same time they're trying to do day-to-day things, that's why it never really happens.
And yet, I consider it as foundational.
It is.
One of those things that we have to have.
Well, I have to tell you, between the wildfires and the earthquake in Alaska, it's very clear that agencies that even had plans, it was very difficult to implement them because they were in the middle of the crisis at that moment. So if you don't have the opportunity to develop it and then have planned tests of it, even during the crisis, that's not gonna work. And once again, that takes time and energy for both staff and specialists who can come in and help do that.
Well, I consider that something that has to be done.
Okay.
And have a, you know, vigorous review of it, you know, with the public and the other agency boards and things. So I see that as a priority for the coming year. You know, even if we have to revisit it periodically and, you know, scenario test it, I think we need something.
Yes.
So
Okay.
I would emphasize that.
Catherine?
I think most of this should be directions to the general manager. And so, because we've been asked to approve things, but, and then they turn into great debates. So I love this list because they're directions from the board to the general manager. I see on these lists lots of need funding. We're in the middle of the budget process. Let's put them
Back to budget.
as a list on the budget. Yeah, in terms of 5.7, I was thinking about I was thinking about this yesterday, just as I saw the news from Alaska, and I thought, ooh, wonder where I'm gonna get information on their sewer system. But and again, but to have a plan is one thing, and to have infrastructure that can withstand a 7.0 earthquake takes a whole lot of money. And so that might be, you know, I don't know, that's just a thought, because I don't think we have that kind of money. And we're all gonna be worried about our own individual systems at the same time, so maybe there won't be a problem for Sam, because there won't be any flow into it.
All right. Rick?
Agreeing with almost everybody. One, I think that's super critical. That sort of ties into my comment about bringing in the community. Go ahead and create a plan, but create a real plan to fix things, and then bring the community in. The 20-year plan, I think we could put on the back burner for a bit. 3's been talked about. 5, 4, 5, and 7, I think we've all agreed that's more for the general manager and their people to work out. And 5, 6, I don't see how you can do anything until after the legal suit. So, not the legal suit, but once Half Moon Bay decides what they're going to do, then we'd have to rebudget and restabilize that whole section once everything else is finalized.
If I could interject, the 20-year plan was so we could be looking at our reserve policies and our funding and
Right.
planning policy, so we could be working to the future. I think that we need to know where we're going in particular financially, instead of just taking short bursts and then at the end of, and only looking at 5 years out, because we have some major, financial commitments that need to be made.
Yes.
Just as a reminder, the conversation around the 20-year was specifically related to funding, with the keeping in mind that more than likely the member agencies would have to do a rate study, and that you really needed at least a long-term look for the rate setting that they would need to be doing. So it was more keeping in mind the needs of the member agencies and their rate setting than it was a commitment to specific projects, but really giving them, how much is SAM gonna cost over this period of time, because that's what they needed to have as a piece to their own rates. So really it was that, and then the 5-year, sort of giving that near view each year, knowing what projects, and we've done the projects that have been in the 5-year. We've done year 1, and then we've done year 2 with that reorder of after the failures of the system. So we've been using it. And the 20-year plan, my understanding is Montera used that in their analysis for their most recent rate setting. So that's the criticality of a 20-year plan, was for the member agencies more than for SAM per se. But so the member agencies could plan for how much that would cost.
I need to modify my comment on that. I had lost sight of the fact that this has extrapolate the 20-year costs, you know, when I suggested drop it, because that's too long of a look, but, you know, extrapolating it from 5 years, I think that's, well, it says completed study, so the work on that is more or less done. So I'm gonna retract my, drop that one.
Okay. Jim?
Well, I think, yeah, number 5.1 is very important, and as Leonard just said, 5.2, the 20 years costs are important, but they've been completed. And for 3, 4, 5, and 7, those are important. I think the lowest priority item here for me is 5, 6.
Okay. Scott?
Yeah, I think along the way we kind of conflated what we thought 5.2 was when we saw it on our budgets, on our agendas. And it's really about projecting so that we can have the conversation about, do we think that continuing down a path is the right way to go, or by knowing how much money we need to put into something, maybe, like, just a wild example, if we knew it was going to cost $100 million to maintain a piece of infrastructure, we might go, you know, I bet we could do something for 50 that was different. But we would never launch out and say, let's go do a $50 million project, unless you knew it was because we wanted to avoid the $100 million project. So the 5.2 is the projection so that we could have those conversations. But I know when it came up on the last agenda, I misunderstood, and now I'm seeing this, I'm like, oh yeah, that, okay. So I think we gotta be careful with our wording and remind ourselves where it comes from, that's all.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with Scott on that, and with everybody on items 1 through 6. On 7, we have the Coastside Emergency Action Plan that meets on the first Friday of every month at the EOC.
Mhm.
And I don't think Sam has a representative on
we
that.
do.
Oh, yeah, they go.
You do?
You do.
Oh, that's right, I've seen you there.
Alternate between Kitchener and myself.
Yeah, so, is that useful to you in terms of developing an emergency action plan for Sam?
Yes, we do take some inputs from that.
Right, and there are exercises that you are involved in? And, you know, I think the idea that everybody gets CERT trained is important, not to Sam, it's important to every citizen of the coast and non-citizen on the coast. Everybody ought to be CERT trained.
Yes. And actually, I don't know if you recall, but a couple of years ago, I started working with the OES training And really, the issue is, we have some peculiarities to the nature of where we're located, that if we were to have something that rendered us isolated, there really isn't a whole lot we can do, but we need to have those plans in place, and that's where we have to rely on experts, because there are very few agencies like us that would be cut off that way. And so that's where the experts helping us, what would we do, and what would be acceptable to the state for us to do in an emergency? That's really where we need to focus, because we would be violating our permit if that happened. I mean, it would almost be impossible for us to maintain. So we need to know what options are there and how quickly can we get back together. That's where we need to work with experts who've done this for other agencies, because it's not like I can pick up the one for Silicon Valley Clean Water that's over the hill and say, okay, this is what we would do. It would be a very different arrangement for us because of our location.
Yeah.
And David, that's why Sam decided instead of a parallel force main to have holding tanks.
Yeah. My question was on the decision to double the capacity, the planning around that.
It was planned, that's why we're not about so much land.
And specifically, what was the plan around when that decision would be triggered to expand it?
When needed.
When needed, okay. Chuck was saying there was a specific plan in place, and, but just couldn't.
And it was ordered by the Water
Let
Quality Board.
me interrupt, excuse me, and keep moving, we're running short on time. Barbara?
I started, I think.
You started, okay. So good.
I have a minor comment.
Yes, please.
I think there might be a typo. I think you mean SEMS, not SIMS, correct?
Where?
Where?
You have
NIMS and
SIM,
SIM,
Standardized
5.7.
Emergency Management
Yeah,
System.
it's with
Five point seven.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a question mark. What is Sims?
That's why I have Sims.
Standardized Emergency Management System.
Yeah.
Right.
E.
Good, thank you.
It's sort
NIMS
of
and
getting
takes
at
care of that
some
one.
overarching
Thank you.
comments. So I do have one.
Yeah.
This has been a pet peeve of mine for as long as I've been working in my career. There needs to be like a schedule or something for doing small, low priority projects. Because if you don't, they never get done, you know, that's a low priority thing, it just keeps getting kicked to the back and kicked to the back and never gets done, so the low priority things
General manager's
have to
report.
age, the small low priority things have to age up. In other words, their priority has to keep increasing until they actually get done.
Well, Leonard, isn't that really the GM's responsibility? Do we need to put that here,
well,
about how to make sure that we
For
don't?
the things that the board directs, what should be done, the small projects that aren't getting done need to have their priority keep going up.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
But that's-
I agree, Leonard, but that's where the nitpicking out of Sam comes in to be destructive.
No, I would put it a different way. So you got a list of things for future board meetings, for example. If you know what the calendar is for the next year, you as a board member can go, could we get this one heard this year? I know it's not the most important thing, but could we find a spot to put it in an agenda 7 months out? If you have that kind of visibility about what's coming, then maybe if you think this is the year that we should do it, maybe, any one of us can say, hey, what would you guys think about putting this on the agenda at this point, if we have time?
I'd like to
Right?
cut
If you
the
don't want your things to be
conversation
starved
off.
out.
Just make one observation.
One observation.
So, what's coming is important, but I'd also be very interested in, what's happened. So, like, at our next strategic planning meeting, I'd like to have like a spreadsheet where we have the goals and objectives and we have some sort of progress update
Yep.
on each of those, done
Absolutely.
or not, where it is in the process.
If you've got your plan, then you can
This
report how
would've-
well you did, right?
That would have saved a lot of time and discussion, I think, today.
I guess that gives us Keeshan's metrics.
Isn't it this?
It's this.
Well, maybe we should just,
Yeah, it's
you
this.
know,
I don't know if I,
Yeah, it was in the agenda, it was an attachment,
okay, so I
and
missed
staff
that.
report,
I
yeah,
missed that, all right.
yeah,
But it's very, it's
It's
brief.
very general.
yeah. Because a lot of these things, sort of general, and
Sorry
we
about
didn't
that.
have the
I didn't
metrics.
notice.
Yeah.
well, no, that's good
No,
you brought
but
it up.
I think
because
what you're saying is true, that a report like this is really valuable.
Absolutely,
And
Shouldn't-
you know what?
shouldn't make a
It's
plan
nice to
if
see
you're
it
not
was done.
yeah, and it's something you can put out there for the public to see too,
Right.
folks. We've made good progress this year.
And you shouldn't make a plan if you don't plan to check to see whether or not you actually,
Yeah.
how to go, right?
Shouldn't check a plan if you don't plan. do the plan check.
We have just under half an hour left, and here's two thoughts about what we can do. We can jump right into starting to outline how the budget process might work. That is definitely sort of an administrative operational thing normally, but I think it's important here to at least get feedback about what those key steps might be, what people want or don't want. We could do that. I would also be interested in knowing, since we had so much discussion, some was contradictory, in hearing about priorities, and I have a thought to combine the two and still get done in a half an hour.
Okay.
Excellent.
One of them is
Good luck.
to think about both at once. One, to ask each of you to think about if you could only prioritize one or at most two things for you. What is the single or two most important things that we ought to do? And is there anything that you feel is important to not do? Because we don't have the resources, or you disagree with it, or whatever.
Are you
So-
talking not do today or
No,
not do
do-
ever?
Not do as part of the strategic planning process, not,
I
like,
thought-
it's not a strategic planning priority.
I thought we decided that. I thought we've got our check marks.
Yes, but now we've had a whole lot of discussion and a whole lot of other information. And it would help me when I'm going through this, because we're gonna extrapolate from this conversation and come back to you with something. And a lot of you contradicted each other on what you thought was important. There was sort of the focus contingent and a sort of a little broader thinking, not broader thinking, but broader, wanted a broader plan. Yes,
If I could just put in
yep,
what I think would be most helpful for me.
good, and it matters for you a lot.
There's, of all of these wonderful ideas, and I've listened and I haven't put any of my input in there, I really want to hear what the board and the other directors have to say. I think there is one thing up there that if you do that, not even the budget, there's one thing up there, if you do that, the rest of this all flows so much better. And you can have these discussions in at a board meeting or another workshop. But the single most important thing up there that you have to answer is the roles and responsibilities between the member agencies and SAM. Because you can talk about the budget, you can talk about the CIP, you can talk about all of these other things, but until there's clarification that everyone can agree upon, you will continue to have these disagreements and misunderstandings that will get in the way of any success that you do, because somebody's going to misinterpret what input, feedback, what those words mean. And until that's defined, all of this is, I think, going to hit speed bumps along the way, because someone's going to feel like they didn't get heard when they thought they were supposed to, or whatever their expectations are. And I've been here for 3 years now. I think I'm like the third longest tenured manager in the last 20 years. So in seeing it, every difficulty that I've had beyond just normal day-to-day operational things is that right there. Because I thought I was solving something, but there was a misunderstanding of what that thing was. What is the definition of is?
Okay,
I agree that 4.7 has to be the top priority thing.
shall we just talk about that and we'll deal with everything else?
And it goes to Barbara's question at the beginning too.
I wonder if somebody, maybe you, Beverly, or maybe you wanna wait till you hear from someone else, can start to frame up a suggestion or outline more specifically what the problem is?
Well, I don't think I need to define, I've been defining for 3 years what the problem is. I mean, we've had these discussions at various iterations as things have occurred. And I just wanted to hand out as a reminder for the board and also for the people who don't know, we actually have some documents that we've created over this 3-year period that was to try and do this. And once again, I think when it gets back to the making sure we all understand the definition of input, feedback, roles and responsibilities, but I agree that we need some very dark black lines as opposed to gray lines. And I think right now, there are more fuzzy gray lines than there are dark black lines of a definite, so that I can say definitively, here's a line. I need to make sure that I stay on my side of the line. I don't go over there, or that I don't miss that I'm supposed to be going over there when I think I'm supposed to stay over here. Right now, it's still vague, and I think part of that comes from either a misunderstanding or forgetting that we've had these discussions and where the line was drawn, and maybe the line was drawn and then afterwards, maybe that line's not working. But I think it's critical for us to do that, to draw those boxes and be very clear. When I've done policies and labor relations and other organizational dynamics, the problem is that people like their box is big, but when you're really trying to define it, it's oftentimes better to define it smaller and very concrete, and then when you're comfortable with that, expand it out, just to give everyone the same understanding. That's my recommendation.
Okay, so, go ahead.
My feeling is that one of the ways we could attack this would be to look at it in terms of a timeline. Now, as we talk about people's responsibilities, if you talk about the budget, for instance, you could say, well, what's the first step? Who does the first bit of work? Who does the second bit of work? Who does the third bit of work? And when does it get to the board? It seems to me all of the work should be done first by the general managers and the member agency manager, and then it gets to the board, and then it goes back someplace. So my feeling is it's a timeline issue. If you say, with the budget, what input do we want first? Do we want member agency managers to have some input into the budget process? Yes, we all agree that we do. Do they do that first? Or does the general manager come out and say, this is what the budget process will look like? My feeling is if you simplify it and you say, okay, you've got 2 weeks, member agency managers, or 1 month, or whatever timeline you put it on, and you say, we need all of your comments by X date, they're going to go to the general manager. The general manager will then have a chance to go back to you, and that has to be done within a certain amount of time, and then it has to come back from the member agency managers to the general manager, and there's a timeline around that.
We actually did that last year, and I had put out, actually for the last 2 years, and I had put out those dates.
I didn't have those dates. What I'm saying is the board needs to see what's happening.
Actually,
the board needs to see what, maybe I should have seen them, maybe they were someplace.
They were,
But-
but if I can make one comment, I don't know if the timeline is such an issue, because the managers and I have had lots of discussions about how much time they need. I think it's even more fundamental than that. It's what is input. And I don't mean to be facetious, but literally it's down to that point of what do you mean by the word input? Because when we've had those discussions, and both Tim and Kishan have been involved in those discussions with the managers, the definition of input and the expectation of what that means is the very fundamental of why we end up in the wrong place. Because my understanding of that word is very different than maybe the city manager's understanding, or Chuck's understanding, or Clement's understanding of what do we mean by input.
Can you give an example?
So for example, input, you can say input, you can have feedback, you can have, whatever word you want to use, but the member agency managers have been very definitive with me the entire time that
how?
Well, I'm going to say, very definitive with me that their input means this is what it will be.
Yes.
That's different than my interpretation of input or feedback, which is here's sort of the universe of what I'm thinking. Here are some key changes or issues that I think I need to have feedback on. I get that feedback, I put it together, and then I use that to make a presentation to the finance committee, and I tell them, these are the things that the member managers have weighed in on, and these are their very specific critical areas that they think need to be considered or whatever. If the direction I get from the the finance committee is go ahead and go with your, meaning me, with your recommendations and we'll discuss this. The member managers are then upset because their input isn't what resulted, or only some of their input is, because they have told me their input is, we want this and anything else is refusing our input, and that's not my definition of input. So I think that's where that cross connection comes.
Well, and if I might add, the agency managers have their meetings without Beverly and they decide on it between themselves and then they decide to tell Beverly what they think. And expect her to follow their direction, which is different than input, but, so there's meetings going on that we as board members, at least my board, is not necessarily informed of. I'm sure you guys
No.
Barbara, do you
I
know?
have a question for those who've been doing this for much longer than me, is what is the right role for the member agency managers?
I think that's the whole question. That is
Well,
the
I mean,
big
some
question
of you
here,
with a
yeah.
longer perspective maybe could speak to that.
Or, I'd like to hear
shorter.
from Bob, maybe Bob has an impression.
Or a
of that.
shorter perspective. I would say that my definition of providing input would be when I'm speaking to the general manager, I'm speaking on behalf of my city council. And if Beverly then gets direction from the other two general managers that is contrary to that, well then, discussion needs to happen at the same board.
But the city.
But if
council-
I'm giving direction, that direction should be taken as on behalf of my city council.
Okay, that
So
said,
what's
the
your
city council does not direct the SAM manager, nor do any of the other agency boards. The SAM board is the only entity that directs the general manager. So you can give suggestions,
Well,
you can.
input, I was
let's-
defining her question of what is input.
Right.
That
And
was my
Scott had a
definition
point.
of
So,
input.
so what's your expectation if you're speaking on behalf of the city council to the general
Well,
manager?
also, of course, meaning our two representatives who are on the same.
Sure, well, but you're much more likely to have more interaction with the general manager than the board members are, because both of you are engaged in day-to-day, jobs doing this. What's your expectation about? Would you expect her to follow your direction, or?
My expectation would be that we would have such a relationship that if Beverly said to me, what you're asking me or telling me to do, your input to me is contrary to what the SAM board collectively directed me to do, I would respect that and say, okay, fair enough, let's resolve that.
Right. I wouldn't even see the need, there's this other thing too, which is, let's get input, but that's not the direction of my board. It's not that it's contrary, it's just,
That's not the direction I received.
it hasn't happened yet kind of thing, as
Yeah.
opposed to, it's, without being in opposition, it's something that, so that sounds right to me. I'd like to see the managers be in a stakeholder relation, there's two roles, honestly. There's the one on the collections, which is more of a straight up contractual relationship for service. So let me set that one aside, because right now we've got two different modalities where the city's engaged in one with a third party and the other two agencies are engaged only with SAM on that. So let's set that one aside, because that's one where I think the individual entities can hammer out whatever relationship they can hammer out. But on the JPA side of things, so the collections and treatment, I'd like to see where managers have a good opportunity to engage at times where the stakeholder relationship is well facilitated. Like, this thing is coming, I'd love to get your feedback on this, because I'm shaping up a plan to take to the board. It'd be great if I landed at the board with something where the board said, I happen to know that my manager is on board with this plan, and we could all go, that's great to know, because now we know there's kind of a consensus on this. It's much easier to approve things at a board level when we know that our respective managers and as a team have landed on something. That feels like we're getting good counsel, right, from our from our respective professionals. If we don't have that from the managers, if we don't have that information at all, like it's just an absence, well, then we just have to rely on our own judgment and whatever information we've got. But it's always nice to have, you know, well, everybody got together and this seems like a plan. It's like, okay, good, that's easy to ratify. Where it breaks down is when any member agency manager says my way or the highway, because, you know, as a board member, they don't get to do my job. That's my job and our job, right? So respecting those roles, I like the way you put it. It's like,
Well, I don't know, I haven't been around that long, so I don't know if there's an
I'm-
example of that happening.
Oh, no,
But it hasn't happened
and
often.
I'm speaking to the general case. I'm not pointing fingers. I'm just saying if anybody comes in and says, I, as a member agency manager, insist that you do this JPA thing my way, then then that person, try to depersonalize this as much as possible, then that person would be, you know, ignoring the fact that there's a board and
So-
that board provides direction. So it's just, this is the kind of conversation though that we're talking about in terms of, can we figure out roles? I don't think anybody's really opposed to that. Just, it gets difficult though when people are talking and somebody just goes, I don't understand why you're not gonna do it my way.
I have to chime in because obviously I'm around a lot more than the board is. I see things that go on. Really appreciate Bob, right?
Bob.
His point of view and how he would approach everything. But when I've been to meetings and I hear member managers say, why am I even trying to manage Sam if you won't listen to what I'm saying? Now, if anybody in this room thinks that that's appropriate, I mean, please, speak up now, because that's why we're here. But if that seems like that is totally the wrong direction to go, then I would like to hear something about that. Anybody?
I have some thoughts on that, and I think what I'm kind of against and what seems to be happening is the three managers getting together and then dealing with Beverly. And again, either saying this is what we want. My version of the board, which, you know, I'll be, you know, joining in a month or so, I'd rather see a process where Beverly creates, I'll call the initial budget, you know, based on last year, plus some changes that they're suggesting and modifications. And that goes out to the other managers. And I would rather see a first shot at the managers bring those to the Montero board and discuss it with the board. Here are the changes that are being suggested. I would like these additional changes. And to me, that's the first input of all the three boards. They get a shot at it right then. They're listening to their general managers, to their managers on what suggestions they want to modify. But I would like the three boards to have that process. So we've all had some input, and then if the three managers want to get together again and rediscuss something, but I'm nervous about the fact that they're making decisions among the three and then telling our general manager here at SAM what they want without, I wanna know what's happening. I don't want my manager, as good as Clemens is, making decisions and negotiating or compromising with all the other managers and then giving that input without my seeing that.
Well, I guess I'm assuming that
Yeah.
Clemens and Chuck are following the same principle that I just stated. I assume that when they speak, they are speaking on behalf.
I'm not, and again, I've been an outsider for a year and a half, so my impression is that's not happening all the time. The impression, one of my concerns is that another kind of process has evolved a little bit where the the three managers, I'll call them, that's easier, get together and then sort of create their document and then present it to the SAM general manager. I don't see, just because I've been gone for so long, that additional step where they bring it back to the boards and get the board approval of what they want to, you know, submit to
I'd
Beverly.
like to suggest a slight alternative to what you're saying, since we're trying to be concrete. If Beverly creates the first budget draft, I think the manager should have a chance to comment on it and really early. But then I think it should go to either the committee or to this board, or the committee and then a board, so that this board can start to get some sort of consensus, not deciding on it, but give some input. And then it can go back maybe to the home boards, because if it just goes presented by the local manager, it's gonna be completely from their perspective, and you want your board members to be able to speak up at those board meetings.
This is what I was talking about, and
Yeah.
that's kind of what I tried to sketch out in this
Yes.
table, where you got these steps across. It starts all the way on the left with, okay, Beverly's gotta get this thing going, so she's responsible for getting the process going, and then sketch together the high level points, and then call together the managers as key stakeholders to look at kind of the broad brush and say, what else should be on the table? And then have that discussion, and then take the result of that discussion probably to the committee, which then hashes that out, and then takes something to the board, hashes that out, and, you know, it goes through these sequences of input, distillation, promoting to the next step, and that, you know, you move across that path, and you keep involving the stakeholders at key points, so that no one at any point is ever surprised and said, hey, how come I didn't get my say? Right, if anybody winds up in a situation of, I wasn't informed and I didn't have the opportunity to participate, then we didn't lay out a good plan. But if we all agree on what that plan is, then we'll know, you know, speak now or forever hold your peace kind of thing happens. Like, if you didn't appeal something to the local board, you can't go talk to the coastal commission about it when it gets there, right? Speak now or forever hold your peace. It gets people to respond in time and to just suck it up if they miss their window. And we've been in that situation here where we've had some people unavailable for things, and deadlines have passed, and then people wanna go revisit it. It's like, you know, that was a real deadline. If we all know that these deadlines mean something, then we can go, hey, you know, I got really sick, I need a little more time. We can all go, well, that makes sense, and we adjust. Or we go, you know, you went on vacation, you didn't get your stuff in, you didn't delegate to somebody, next year, right? It just so that's what I'm trying to get to with this, something where we just have a really good picture of who's involved at what point, and who's got authority at which point, and who's got responsibility at each point. And my image of this doesn't have to be the one we adopt, but
Will you share that with me,
Yeah,
just so,
here.
just so,
Pass that on
since
down
you've
to-
done some thinking, Catherine?
The other issue that I have heard is, and a quote from my manager, well, I wouldn't do it that way. I can do it with fewer people, I can do it differently, I can do it for less cost. And my response has been, Beverly's the GM. She has the data to back up what she's saying. I suggest we go with it, and I've gotten, but I think I'm not the only one who has ever gotten that comment, and I think under these roles and responsibilities, the primary one is the agency managers are responsible for their agency, and they owe the general manager, who was hired by this SAM board, therefore they also owe this SAM board the respect to honor their choice of Beverly and Beverly's management choices. And we can deal with it, but it by asking questions, but if the board is comfortable, then just because someone else wouldn't have done it that way, doesn't mean that it's a wrong way to do it. And I believe fundamental to roles and actions is respect, and willing to admit that other people do things differently. You know, we've all gone through it in our professional and personal lives, and at some point you just have to say, well, that's the way it is. And not hold the budget up.
So what I'm hearing is that really the agency manager's input isn't that important. It's just one early step, which is not what I'm hearing from our agency manager, who would like to have more input. So I'm surprised.
Yeah, it seems
oh,
to me
I'm not
like.
suggesting they're not involved all along. I'm suggesting that they've gotta be involved right up front, otherwise their stuff has to get injected in at some point, and better earlier than later.
Well, this just says there's a draft budget and then they get to comment and then it goes to the board and through the process and how did those comments, I mean, it seems to me these three people do have years of experience here and that somehow that has to play into, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with what you're saying, I'm just trying to
I'm
see a
saying put
process
more
that
detail
we're-
on it so that exactly what you're talking about happens.
And then their comments, what happens to their comments? If the first budget is put together and then they comment on it, and do they sit down and talk it over? I mean, maybe a facilitated discussion, or is it all put it out and then take comments back and make changes? I mean, is there collaboration at all?
Well, this is
going
like
on?
putting together a bill in Sacramento, right? I mean, somebody's gonna sponsor a bill, and they're gonna draft it up, and then they're gonna show it around, and it's gonna undergo some changes if you're gonna get some people on board to get the votes, right? So while
And
it's,
sometimes till the very last minute in the
Yeah.
schedule.
but it works better when it's up front instead of at the last minute.
It's never upfront.
I
It's
know,
always last
but
minute.
we're on but we've got a budget, it's a thing, we can like really focus the energy on it to get it up front, and if we do it right, I think, you asked what happens, I don't believe that the member agency managers in that first consult have I don't think it would be realistic to expect that whatever they put on the table is gonna survive through to the budget. I don't think they can expect that. I think, though, that if they don't put it up, there's very little chance it's gonna make it into the budget, so they're gonna have to argue to get it in. And they're arguing, they're not arguing, but they're discussing it with the manager. And then I expect the manager to bring all of that stuff to the committee. And the committee's got the responsibility for trying to put some shape on that first draft.
You see, I'm kind of concerned about that linkage.
Okay.
So, I agree that the member agency managers need to be involved up front, but I wanna know what their input was.
No, that's
So
what,
that
I'm sorry, that's what I was trying to say.
When it comes to us, I don't want just Beverly's version, I wanna know what the proposed input.
Oh, no, I just said
Yeah.
that Beverly's plus
Yeah.
theirs all goes to the committee. And the committee.
Yeah, but not hers incorporating
No,
selectively what,
I'm
but, yeah.
saying it's the,
Yeah.
everything that got put on the table, right? And I expect hers to have a really good framework, right? So I expect that to be kind of like the primary skeleton in the, if things are going well, right? But we're gonna have things where somebody says, it's really important to me this year that we do the following. I can't imagine that the committee wouldn't want that full piece of, we're in agreement, I just use different words.
So
I
I just
don't
need
think
to
there's any
say,
disagreement at all.
at this point in time, the videographer has to leave.
Okay.
That doesn't mean we have to stop talking, but just so you know, we won't be recording anymore. I think the conversation is still worthwhile, but I do have to recognize that he has to leave.
Can you do
I-
an audio recording
Thank
for
you.
us?
Can we take a bio break and put up a tape recorder?
Sure.
I would like that.
Can we pick 2:30 as a stop time?
Yeah.
Let's try.
Then let's make the break as short as possible, 5
Yep.
minutes.
Make a break,
Bye.
and then we'll make a break for it.